Welcome back to Harry's Verse. Today's story, what if Harry Potter was chosen by death to reign over the living and the dead? Before we dive in, do take a second to subscribe and tap the bell so not a single story slips past you. Comfortable, good, let's begin. Chapter 1, The Cold Hour the Heat Would Not Break. For 9 days it had pressed down on Little Winging like a hand laid flat over the whole estate, and Privet Drive lay under it without complaint, lawns the color of old straw, cars ticking as they cooled, every window shut against air that gave nothing back. Harry sat on the low brick wall by the playground at the end of Magnolia Crescent and watched the street lamps come on one at a time, orange against a sky that had not yet decided to be dark. He had been outside since dinner. Inside the house there was the television and his aunt's careful avoidance of the corner of any room he occupied, and outside there was at least the chance of an owl. No owl had come. None had come for 11 days now, which was the kind of arithmetic he had stopped doing aloud because saying it made it real, and real meant they had decided somewhere in a castle in Scotland that the safest thing was for him to know nothing at all. He understood the logic. He had even in his more generous hours agreed with it. It did not make the silence sit any easier. He turned Cedric over in his mind the way the tongue finds a broken tooth, not the duels, not the maze, not the cup that had not been a cup. Just the after, him on his back in the long grass of the graveyard with the do not yet off it and his eyes open to a sky he was no longer in. People said the dead looked peaceful. People said a great many things to make the living feel better about standing upright while someone else did not. Cedric had not looked peaceful. He had looked surprised, as though something had been promised and then at the last instant withdrawn. A dog barked 2 streets over and stopped. The street lamp steadied, and the heat, which had not broken in 9 days, broke. It did not break into rain, it broke into cold. Harry knew the cold before he knew anything else, knew it the way you know a voice in the dark, and he was off the wall and moving before the thought finished assembling itself. The orange lamps overhead guttered like candles in a draught and went out, one then the next, then the whole street, and the stars did not come to take their place. The dark that arrived was not the absence of light. It had weight, it had a direction. It came up Magnolia Crescent toward the mouth of the underpass with the unhurried confidence of water finding the lowest point of a room. He had his wand out. He could not have said when. The pavement under his trainers had gone slick with a frost that had no business existing in July, and his breath stood in front of his face in a pale rag, and from inside the underpass came a sound he had heard once before in the dark of a moving train, a long, wet, dragging inhalation, the sound of something breathing that did not need to breathe and did it anyway for the pleasure of the cold it made. 2 of them came out of the underpass. He had faced one. One had been enough to put him on the floor of the Hogwarts Express with his mother screaming in the hollow of his skull. 2 filled the narrow throat of the underpass shoulder to shoulder, taller than men, their robes moving though there was no wind to move them, and where their faces should have been there was only the long pull of that breath, drawing the warmth out of the brick, out of the air, out of him. The street lights did not come back, they would not while these were here. Light was a kind of warmth, and warmth was theirs now. Expecto Patronum, he said. His voice came out level, which surprised some part of him that was still capable of noticing. He held the spell in his mind the way he had been taught, reached for the memory, the broom under him and the wind and the first clean joy of flight, and the joy would not come. The cold had already found it. The Dementors took another step, and the memory thinned to paper, and the paper went gray, and there was nothing on the end of his wand but a wisp of silver that broke apart before it cleared the tip. Expecto Patronum, worse. The graveyard came instead, the green light, the surprised dead. His knees met the frozen pavement without his deciding to kneel. The nearer Dementor lowered itself over him, and the hood, which had no face inside it, came down toward his, and he understood with the flat clarity of a man reading his own diagnosis upside down across a desk that he was not going to win this. There was no third spell coming. There was the cold and the long breath and the certain knowledge that whatever lived behind his eyes was about to be drawn out through them like thread through the eye of a needle. He thought absurdly of Dudley. Dudley was somewhere behind him on the path. He had heard him earlier blundering home from someone's house, and Dudley could not see these things and would not understand the cold and would simply stop, the way a candle stops. The thought was the last warm thing in him. The Dementor took it too. Then the hood closed over his mouth and the cold went all the way down, and Harry Potter died. There was no transition. That was the first thing, and he would carry the strangeness of it for the rest of whatever followed. That death did not come the way the films had taught him, as a tunnel and a light, a journey from one place to another. One moment there had been the underpass and the frost and the long indrawn breath, and the next there was this, and the 2 did not touch, and there had been nothing in between for them to touch across. He stood in a gray country. It went on without feature in every direction, a plain the color of the inside of a cloud, neither warm nor cold, the absence of both, lit by no sun he could find, and yet perfectly visible to the edge of seeing, where it did not so much grow dark as cease. Underfoot there was something that took his weight without being ground. Above there was something that gave light without being sky. He was not breathing. He noticed this the way you might notice that a clock has stopped, by the silence where a sound should be. There was no rag of breath in front of his face because there was no breath, and there was no cold and there was no fear because fear was a thing the body did, and he had, it seemed, briefly set the body down. He looked at his hands. They were his hands. The scar on the back of the left one, I must not tell lies, white now and faded, but there the lettering Umbridge's quill had cut. He did not have that scar in this place because he had it. He had it because some part of him insisted on being the shape it had always been, even here, where shape was a courtesy and nothing more. He took a step to learn whether stepping meant anything in this place. It did and it did not. The gray country did not pass beneath him the way ground passes beneath a walking man. Rather, the distance he had meant to cross simply ceased to lie between him and where he had meant to arrive, so that he arrived without traveling, and the not traveling was worse than any motion could have been. He stopped. He had the sense of standing at the bottom of something vast and inverted, a cathedral built downward, its vaults below him and its floor somewhere overhead in the gray, and the sense would not resolve into a picture whichever way he turned, because it was not a place the eyes had been built to hold. It was the idea of a place. It was the waiting room of everything that had ever stopped. Beneath its silence ran a murmur at the very edge of hearing, the last words of everything that had ever come this far and gone no further, and he understood that if he reached he could draw any one of them up to him, and so he kept his attention on the middle distance and reached for nothing. "Hello," he said. The gray took the word and gave nothing back. There was no echo because there was nothing to echo from. He turned a slow circle. Empty, empty, empty. And then in the place where seeing stopped, not empty. It was not a figure. He wanted badly for it to be a figure, a robed thing with a scythe, a skull, anything the human animal had ever drawn on a tomb to make the unbearable into a picture small enough to hold. It was not that. What stood at the edge of the gray country, or did not stand, or had always been standing and only now permitted him to notice, was the place where the gray country ended. It was the edge itself. It was the line past which there was no more seeing, gathered up and given a kind of attention, so that the whole horizon of the world he had died into bent toward him as a face bends toward a thing it has decided to regard. He understood then that it had been regarding him for a very long time. Well met. The words did not come as sound. They arrived already inside him, in the marrow, in the spaces between one heartbeat and the heartbeat that did not follow, and they were patient in a way that no patience he had ever known could approach, the patience of a thing that had never once in its existence been required to hurry, because all roads came to it eventually and it had only to wait at the end of every one. Harry stopped. He found he could not be sure the next word was true until he had said it, and even then, your death. I am the end of every sentence. The attention of the horizon settled more fully upon him, and the gray country dimmed at its edges, narrowing until there was only the plain and Harry and the regarding thing. I am the full stop that gives the words their meaning. Wizards have called me many things and feared the names more than the thing. You may use the short one, it will serve. Am I dead? You have died. The distinction arrived with the weight of a stone door swinging. That is not the same as being dead, any more than having spoken is the same as being silent forever after. I have not yet decided what you are. The Dementors, the least of my doorways. The gray rippled, and for an instant Harry saw the underpass laid over it, transparent, the two robed things crouched over a body that was his own, the breath still pouring out of it in a thread of pale light that the nearer Dementor drank. They are mouths. They are not me. They do not know whose table they have come to. The vision faded. Harry stood very still. He had spent much of his short life being told things by adults who meant him either great good or great harm, and he had learned to listen to the spaces between the words. Something here was being circled. The thing at the edge of the world had reached a decision and was taking the long way around to telling him. Why am I talking to you? He said. People die all the time. You don't, he gestured at the gray, at the regarding horizon. You can't do this for all of them. I do this for none of them. The plane brightened very slightly, and Harry had the unsettling sense of having pleased it. They come, they pass. I am the threshold and they cross it, and I have no more need to speak to them than a door has need to speak to those who walk through it. He had the sense it was choosing him a vantage from which to see. You, it said, and the word was different from all the others, are not walking through. Then what am I doing? The horizon bent closer. When it spoke again, the patience in it had an undertow, the first hint that this vastness had wanted something perhaps for a very long time, and that wanting was the strangest thing Harry had yet encountered in the gray country, because he had not known until that moment that the end of all things could want. 3 times you have come to my door, it said. Attend, for I have counted, and I do not count often. The gray filled with a night Harry had been told about and never seen. A cottage, a nursery, a woman standing between a cradle and a wand. Not Harry, please not Harry, take me instead. The green light. And then where the films and the storytellers always stopped, death did not stop. The woman crossed the threshold, the child did not. The green light broke upon the child and turned, the way a wave turns on a rock that will not move, and went back the way it had come, and found the one who had cast it, and tore him in a manner Harry had no words for, because what it tore was not a body. I have seen many give their lives, said the voice. Few give them so that the gift takes root. She did not flee me. She walked to me with her arms open and her son behind her, and in the walking she made of herself a door I could not be commanded through. That is the first time you came to me. You came in her arms, and I sent you back because she had paid the toll, and I am not a thief. The night dissolved. The graveyard rose in its place, the great black tomb, the cauldron, the thing that climbed out of it new and terrible. And Harry bound to the headstone, and the green light coming again, and the meeting of 2 wands and the thread of gold that strung between them, while the shades of the murdered walked out of the joining and stood with him. The second time, said Death, you stood in the graveyard of your fathers with my mark already on you, and you did not beg. The shades in the vision turned their faces toward Harry where he watched. They came to you. Do you understand what that means? The dead do not come when a wizard calls. They came because you called and they were glad to answer, and I permitted it because I had begun by then to wonder. Wonder what? Whether after so long I had found one. The graveyard faded, the gray returned, and the underpass with it, the two dementors, the body, the last thread of light. The third time, now. Every age of your kind, said Death, and the patience had gone entirely from the voice now, and what remained was older and barer and closer to the bone of things has produced its seekers. They come to me sideways in their cleverness. They make SDONES to recall the dead and wands to defeat all rivals and CLOAKS to hide from my sight. And they call these things mastery and they die clutching them, everyone because they sought to be my master by fleeing me, and the thing that flees is never the master of what it flees from. The gray trembled. Harry felt it through the soles of feet that were not standing on anything. One tore his soul into pieces so that he need never come to my door at all. The voice did not rise. It did not need to. He scattered himself across the world like a man hiding coins from a creditor, and he named this immortality, and he is the greatest fool I have watched in an age of FOOLS because he believes he has escaped me when all he has done is refuse to balance an account that will be balanced regardless. The debt GROWS, the interest compounds, and I have waited for the hand that will collect it. Harry said nothing. He had begun to see the shape of the thing being circled, and the seeing of it had stilled him in a way the Dementors had not. You do not flee, said Death. 3 times you have stood at my door, and 3 times you have looked at me without the groveling that your kind calls courage. You grieve what I take, but you do not hate me for the taking, because some part of you has always known what every child knows before the world TEACHESIT otherwise, that I am not the enemy. That I am the mercy at the end of the pain, that a world without me would be the truest hell that could be built. What do you want from me? Harry said. It did not come out as a question. He had stopped pretending he did not know. I want a sovereign. The 2 words landed in the gray country, and the gray country rang with them like the inside of a struck bell, and the regarding horizon drew in all the way, until Death was no longer the edge of the world but stood, if it could be called standing, an arm's length from Harry, vast and close at once, and looking into it was looking down the length of every ending there had ever been. I am the threshold, it said, and a threshold must be kept. For an age the keeping has been mine alone, and it is enough, and it is not enough, for the living have learned to pick the lock. They make HORRORS that should not walk, they bind the dead who should have rest, they tear their souls and call it triumph. I cannot walk among them, for I am the end, and the end cannot move through the middle of the story without bringing the story to a close. But you can, you are of the living, you are become also of me. I would make you my master made manifest, my hand in the world of the breathing, sovereign over the living and the dead alike, that what is mine to keep might be kept. No, the word was out of him before the offer had finished settling. It surprised the gray country, it surprised Harry, but it stood. I'm 15, he said. I've got there are people, I'm not, I don't want to rule anything. I want to go home and I want the owls to come and I want. His voice did something he did not let it finish doing. Send me back, you said you sent me back before. Send me back and I'll go to school and I'll fight him like everyone wants me to, and when it's over you can have me same as everyone. That's the deal everyone gets. I'll take that one. That deal, said Death, is no longer available to you. There was no cruelty in it. That was the worst of it, there was no cruelty in it at all, only the flat truth of a tide explaining itself to a man who has built his house below the line of it. You have stood at my door 3 times. The first was your mother's doing, the second was your enemy's, the third is mine. I do not send back what I have chosen to keep, I send back what I have chosen to make. And if I say no to the making, then you will cross the threshold like any other, and I will grieve the waste, for I do not grieve often and I had thought not to grieve tonight. The gray dimmed at the suggestion, and somewhere in the dimming Harry felt the underpass grow more distant, the thread of light from his own mouth thinning toward its end. He will win if you do, the one who tore his soul. He will unpick my locks one by one and fill the world with things that should be at rest and are not. And the living will envy the dead, and the dead will find no door. I do not say this to move you. I say it because you asked me what I want, and I have never once in all my keeping told a lie. 4 lies are for those who fear what is coming, and nothing is coming for me. Harry looked at the floor that was not a floor. He thought about Cedric, surprised in the long grass. He thought about his mother walking toward this thing with her arms open. He thought about a man, if man was still the word, who had been so frightened of the gray country that he had broken himself into pieces rather than ever stand where Harry was standing now. The death-fearer, the thing in the graveyard, climbing new and wet out of the cauldron, screaming his terror of mortality into the faces of men he had bent to his will precisely because they too were afraid. And here was the offer, not to flee death. To be its hand. It cost something, Harry said. It was not a guess. He had lived 15 years and learned exactly one law that had never once failed him, which was that nothing worth having was ever given for nothing, and the larger the gift, the larger the unspoken price. Everything does. What does this one cost? The regarding thing was quiet for a long moment, and in the quiet Harry understood that he had asked the question it had been waiting to be asked, and that the waiting had been a kind of test, and that he had passed it not by being brave but by being unwilling to be lied to. It costs your place at the table of the living, said Death, and now the voice was almost gentle, which was unbearable. You will eat with them and they will feel the cold of the threshold come in with you. You will love them and they will love you, and between you there will always be a pane of glass the thickness of everything that ends. You will see what no living wizard sees, and having seen it you will not be able to unsee it, and the world will be thinner to you forever for the knowing of what lies behind it. Each time you reach across the threshold to command what is mine, a little more of the warm world will let go of you. This is not a punishment, it is a weight. CRWNS are heavy, mine is the heaviest there is, I will not pretend otherwise. What will I be able to do, he said at last. It was not greed that asked it. It was the question of someone handed a tool he had never seen, wanting to know its edges before he closed his hand on the haft. You will see the threshold wherever it lies, said Death, and it lies everywhere, for everything that lives is a door held half open. You will look at a man and see the hour of his ending standing behind him like a shadow thrown by a light he cannot feel. The dead will not be hidden from you. No shade will lie to you, for the dead cannot lie to the one who keeps the door they long to pass. You will call back what has not yet gone far, and what you call will come, for it will have no choice, and that is a power you will learn to dread in your own hand long before you learn to trust it. You will lay to rest what has been bound against its nature, the ghost that cannot leave, the corpse made to walk, the fragment of a soul nailed into a cup as so its owner might cheat the toll. Kings will kneel to you not because you ask it, but because some older part of them will know its sovereign and bow before the mind has time to forbid it. And I'd keep it, Harry said. The being human underneath, I'd still be me. That, said Death, is not mine to promise. It will be yours to hold. Many who held less have let go of more. The horizon bent very close, but I have watched you grieve a boy you barely knew and carry him home through a killing field when it would have been easier to leave him. I do not choose the cold ONES master. The cold ONES seek me out, and I turn them away, for they would make of my threshold a throne of skulls. I choose the one who will feel the weight and carry it anyway. That is the whole of the test. There was never any other. The thread of light in the distant underpass was very thin now. Harry could feel his own ending the way you feel a held breath about to give. There were 2 doors here and only 2. Behind one was rest, and behind the other a weight he could not begin to measure. The rest was a lie because there was a man in the world who would fill it with horrors if Harry walked through it, and Cedric was already on his back in the long grass, and Harry was so deeply and permanently tired of standing at gravesides and being told there was nothing he could have done. There was always something he could do, that was the trouble with him. Everyone had always said so, in tones that suggested it was a flaw. He turned it over once, the fast turning he used when there was no time for the slow kind. The offer was not kindness, he did not pretend otherwise. The thing at the edge of the world wanted a tool, and it had found one shaped to its hand, and it had been honest about the cost because honesty cost it nothing and bought his trust cheap. None of that changed the arithmetic. A world with the death-fearer loose in it and unanswered was worse than a world with Harry carrying a weight he had never asked for. Cost fell on him either way. The only question was whether it bought anything. This bought something. The other door, the one that led to grass and quiet, bought nothing but his absence from a fight that would go on without him and go badly in the going, and he had never once managed to choose his own absence from a fight that mattered. All right, he said. The gray country went still in a way it had not been still before, the stillness of a vast held expectation finally released. I'll carry it, Harry said. Show me how. There is nothing to show. The horizon began to draw back, and as it drew back it did not diminish. It spread, it sank into him, the edge of the world pouring itself into the small living shape of him like the sea poured into a cup that impossibly did not overflow. You will know, the knowing is the gift. When you open your eyes you will see the threshold in every room, and the dead will turn to you as plants turn to the sun, and the living will feel something they cannot name and will call it by every wrong name until they arrive at the right one, which is dominion. Geo back, master. Your reign is long, and I am patient, and I will be waiting at the end of it as I wait at the end of all things. And on that day you and I will speak again as equals, which is a thing I have said to no other in the whole of my keeping. Wait, Harry said, the gray was going. How will I know what to do, what you want? The last of it poured into him, and the voice came from inside now, from the new cold place that had opened behind his ribs where there had been only the ordinary warm machinery of a living chest. Keep the threshold, it said. Raise what must rise, lay to rest what must rest. And when you find the one who tore himself to flee me, the gray country ended the way it had told him it would, not in darkness but in the simple cessation of more. Close the account. Harry opened his eyes on the floor of the underpass, and the Dementors screamed. He had not known they could. The sound of it was the breath run backward, the long wet inhalation reversed into something high and tearing, and he was on his back on the frozen concrete looking up at the 2 of them as they reared away from him, their robes thrashing in a wind that still was not there, and he understood, lying there with the frost melting under the sudden ordinary heat of him, that they had bent down to feed and had found, where a 15-year-old's terror should have been, the thing that had made them. The threshold. The table they served, sitting up and looking back, they could not flee fast enough. The nearer one came apart first. It did not burn and it did not bleed. It simply stopped being a thing that held together, unraveling from the hood downward into smoke that the night took and did not give back, and the second was already gone, fled up the throat of the underpass and out into the dark of Magnolia Crescent, and Harry felt it go the way you feel a draft find the gap under a door, and he knew without deciding to know that it would not stop running until it ran out of the world entirely. Because it had looked into the face of the one thing in all creation that a Dementor has cause to fear, and the face had been a child's. The cold lifted. The street lamps came back on one, then the next, then the whole orange length of the crescent, and the July heat rolled back into the underpass and found Harry lying in it, alive, breathing, the frost gone to ordinary damp beneath him. He sat up. Behind him on the path, Dudley was a large pale shape folded against the wall with his arms over his head, making a sound like a much smaller person, and he was alive. And Harry registered this and noted it in a distant, administrative way, a thing checked off a list, and the flatness of the noting was the first thing he caught that was wrong with him, and it would not be the last. He stood. His legs took his weight. His wand was still in his hand. Everything was on the inventory in order, and nothing was in order at all because the world had changed its color while he was away. It was not that the colors were gone. It was that he could see now the thing the colors had always been laid over, the canvas showing through a painting he had looked at all his life. The brick of the underpass was brick, and also the slow story of its own ending, the day it would fall. Grass on the bank was green, and also already hay, already mulch, already the next green that would feed on it. Dudley, sobbing against the wall, was a frightened boy of 16, and also a warmth on a wick that would burn 60 years and then not. And Harry saw the both of him at once, the now and the end of it, and made himself stop looking, because looking at Dudley like that was a thing you could not take back, and he had only just learned he could do it. "Get up," he said. His voice was his own. That at least the gray country had left him. "Dudley, get up, they've gone." Dudley did not move, and Harry crossed to him and took him by the arm, and where his hand closed on his cousin's heavy forearm, he felt the cold of the threshold pass out of himself and into the touch, and Dudley flinched from it as from a burn and looked up, and his eyes found Harry's face and went wide and white in a way that had nothing to do with Dementors. Dudley got out. "Your eyes." "They've gone, don't," Harry said. "Whatever it is, don't walk." They walked. Up out of the underpass and along Magnolia Crescent, past the lit windows behind which ordinary people watched ordinary television in the recovered heat, and Harry walked among them and felt the pane of glass already in place, the thickness of everything that ends, exactly as he had been told, and he did not weep because the new cold place behind his ribs did not seem inclined to let him, and he wondered if that was the first warmth let go or only the shock, and could not tell. And added the not being able to tell to the inventory of things gone wrong. Halfway along the crescent he saw the first of them. An old man stood at the gate of number 11 in a dressing gown gone out of fashion 30 years before, one hand resting on a latch he no longer had the substance to lift, watching the lit window of what had been his house and was now somebody else's. He did not turn as Harry passed. He had the patience of the long dead, and he was waiting for a door no one had ever thought to open for him, and Harry walked past and did not stop. There was Dudley to get home. There was a ministry that would be sending its owls. There were 100 reasons not to stand in the road at midnight and open the threshold for a stranger, and Harry told himself the reasons and kept walking. The cold place behind his ribs took note of the old man at the gate the way a ledger notes an unpaid debt. Every shade he passed and did not lay to rest would stand in him now alongside the others, waiting, and this too was part of the wait, the part no one had warned him about. The plain, unending arithmetic of all the doors there were to open and the single life he had been given to open them with. Mrs. Figg met them at the mouth of Wisteria Walk. She came out of the dark in her tartan slippers with her string bag of cat food forgotten in one hand, and she had been running, and her face when she saw Harry standing whole in the streetlight did something complicated. "Mundungus was meant to be watching you," she said, breathless. "He left. He just the wretch, I'll skin him, or you did they?" Her eyes went to Dudley, swaying and gray-faced, and then back to Harry and stopped. She had been a squib her whole long life, on the outside of the world she loved, able to see the edges of magic and never the center of it, and Harry watched her look at him and watched the lifetime of almost seeing finally land on something it could see, and her hand with the string bag in it lowered slowly to her side. "What happened to you?" she said. It was not the question she had started toward. It was a different one asked in a different voice, the voice of someone who has felt a cold come off a person and does not have a word for it. "Two Dementors," Harry said. "They're dealt with. He needs chocolate." He nodded at Dudley. "I'm all right." He was not all right, they both knew it. Mrs. Figg's cats had come out around her ankles and stood with their backs arched and their fur up. Not at Dudley, not at the dark, at Harry, and one by one they turned and fled back into the dark of Wisteria Walk. And Mrs. Figg watched them go and then made herself look at Harry again, and there was something in her face now that he would come to know very well in the months ahead. That he would learn to read on the faces of aurors and ministers and old men who had once gone looking for the mastery of death in books, the particular stillness of a person who has just understood that the thing in front of them is not what it appears to be and is, very possibly, beyond the reach of anything they could do about it. "You'd better come in," she said. "Both of you." She stopped. "The headmaster will want to know." "He'll know," Harry said. He did not know how he knew that. But it was true, the way the brick's ending was true, a fact that sat in the new cold place and was simply available to him. And he understood that Albus Dumbledore, somewhere in his sleeping castle, had already woken, had already sat up in the dark with the certainty that something had shifted in the floor of the world, and had not yet worked out why. The owl came an hour later, while Harry sat in Mrs. Figg's stuffy front room with a mug of tea going cold in his hands and Dudley wrapped in a blanket on the settee eating chocolate with the dull mechanical persistence of the badly shocked. Harry had not touched the tea. He had been watching since he sat down the corner of the room by the window where a small gray shape stood that Mrs. Fig could not see. It was a cat, or it had been. It stood where the litter tray must once have been in some earlier arrangement of the room, a thin tabby with the particular dignity of the very old, and it looked at Harry with eyes that held the gray country in them, and it did not move, and it did not fade, and it waited. One of Mrs. Fig's, he understood, dead some years, lingering here in the warm, familiar room because no one had ever shown it the door, and it had not known how to find the door alone. Harry looked at it for a long moment. And then, because the knowing was in him and would not be put down, he understood what it was waiting for, and he understood that he could give it, and that the giving would cost him a thread of the warm world, and he understood that he was going to do it anyway, because the dead cat had been standing in the corner of this room for years, and that was no kind of rest for anything. "Go on," he said very quietly so that Mrs. Fig in the kitchen would not hear. "It's all right, there's a door, I'll show you." He did not raise his wand, he did not say a spell. He reached in the new cold place behind his ribs for the threshold he had agreed to keep, and he opened it the width of a cat, and the gray shape in the corner lifted its head, and for one moment it was young again, a kitten, and then it was nothing, gone through into the rest that had been waiting for it all along, and the room was lighter for its leaving, and Harry was colder, exactly as much colder as one old cat is worth. And he sat in Mrs. Fig's front room with the price of his first act of dominion settling into him like cooling iron. The owl tapped at the window, he let it in. It was a ministry owl, official and self-important, and the letter it carried was addressed to him in green ink, and he read it without surprise because he had heard a version of it already in the spaces between Death's words, and it told him in the language of a frightened bureaucracy that he had performed magic in the presence of a muggle, and was expelled and would surrender his wand, and that representatives would arrive shortly to destroy it. Harry set the letter down on Mrs. Fig's doily and looked at the green ink and felt nothing the letter wanted him to feel. They would come, let them come. He turned the wand over in his fingers, holly and phoenix feather, the first thing in his life that had ever been truly his, and he thought about the Ministry of Magic, the great machine of it, the courtrooms and the corridors and the men who believed they held the power of the wizarding world in their soft, accustomed hands. And he thought about a thing at the edge of the gray country that had named him sovereign over the living and the dead, and he understood that the two facts could not both remain true, and that the resolving of them was not going to go the way the ministry expected. He did not smile. The new cold place did not seem to know how, but something in him that was still warm, still 15, still the part that had carried Cedric home across a killing field when it would have been easier to leave him, took a grim note of the distance between what the letter assumed and what was about to be the case and set it aside for later. Outside, the heat had not broken again. It would not for the rest of that long July, but Harry sat in the lamplit room with the dead cat gone to its rest and the living world held off behind its pane of glass, and he did not feel the heat at all. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, What the Dead Know They Came for His Wand at Dawn. Harry had not slept. He had spent the dark hours in the smallest bedroom of number 4 with the window open to the unbroken heat, watching the street and learning the new arithmetic of it. The slug dying under the privet hedge 3 days from done. The cat 2 gardens over with perhaps a year left in its kidneys. The old woman at number 7 whose light burned all night because some animal part of her had begun to suspect the autumn would be her last and did not want to spend the dark not knowing. He did not reach for any of them. He had learned that much already. To look was free, to reach cost. The 2 from the ministry apparated into the front garden at 6, and he felt them arrive the way he now felt everything arrive, as a small disturbance at the threshold, 2 warm shapes with their endings folded up inside them like letters not yet opened. He went down before they knocked. His aunt and uncle were still asleep. Dudley had not left his room since Mrs. Fig's. He lay awake behind his door, and Harry could feel him there, a warmth that flinched whenever Harry passed in the hall, and Harry left him to it because there was nothing he could say to Dudley that would not make it worse. He opened the front door before the taller of the 2 could raise his knuckles to it. "Mr. Potter," the taller one recovered well. He wore ministry robes pressed to a hard edge and carried a leather case of the sort that held instruments, and his companion was younger and held a clipboard against her chest like a shield she did not yet know she would need. "McNair, Department of Magical Law Enforcement, here regarding the unauthorized use of magic at—" "You're not McNair," Harry said. The official stopped. "McNair works for the other side. He swings an axe for the Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures, and he took a fee from a man with no nose to be at a graveyard 2 months ago." Harry watched the name land. He had not meant to say it. It had simply been there, available, the way the slug's 3 days were available, because the dead in that graveyard had seen the executioner's face, and the dead did not keep secrets from him now. "You borrowed his name off a duty roster because it sounded heavier than yours. What's yours?" The clipboard lowered an inch. The younger woman had gone the color of the dawn. "That's—" the official's hand moved toward his own wand and thought better of the motion halfway. "That is not your concern. You are to surrender your wand for destruction under decree." "No," Harry said. He did not say it loudly. He had discovered, in the few hours he had owned the new cold place behind his ribs, that volume was a thing people reached for when they were losing. And he was not losing, and the evenness of his own voice was one more item on the inventory of things gone wrong with him. He stood in the doorway in a t-shirt 3 sizes too big and his cousin's old jeans and looked at two armed adults from the government of magical Britain, and he watched them both feel it, the cold coming off him, the draft from under a door that should not have been there in the heat of a July dawn. You can't refuse, the official said. You're a child, the decree is read the room, Harry said. It was not a threat. He wanted that understood later when he turned it over. He had not threatened them. He had simply stopped holding the sight closed, the way you might stop holding your stomach in and let them see for one moment what he saw. The garden behind them was full. The Dursleys' lawn, the privet, the pavement beyond, full of the standing dead of Little Winging, the ones he had walked past on the night of the Dementors and the ones he had not yet met, drawn to the threshold that now walked around in a 15-year-old's body, turned toward him as plants turn to the sun, exactly as he had been promised. They had not been there a second before. They had always been there. The difference was only that now the two from the ministry could feel the weight of an attention they could not see, 100 patient regards settling on the backs of their necks, and the younger woman made a sound and sat down hard on the garden path, and the one with the case dropped it. Pick that up, Harry said. Go home. Tell whoever sent you that the wand stays with me, and the one who used it isn't the problem you were briefed on, and the next person you send should be braver than you because you're about to run. They ran. The taller one did not bother to apparate from the garden. He hauled the woman up by the arm and went out the gate and down Privet Drive at a pace no ministry official had ever moved at in daylight, and the leather case lay open on the path with its instruments glinting, a pair of silver shears meant for the snapping of wands, and Harry looked at them and did not pick them up, and the standing dead of Little Winging folded away into the ordinary morning, and the heat came back. And somewhere up the street a milk float whined along on its rounds as though the world had not for 10 seconds shown its second face on a suburban lawn. He shut the door. His hands were steady. He looked at them as if they belonged to someone he was being asked to vouch for and could not. The owl from Dumbledore came an hour later. It said very little. It said that arrangements were being made, that he was to touch the kettle in the kitchen at 6:30 that evening and not before, and that he was to tell no one. It did not mention the wand or the ministry or the thing that had happened on the lawn, and the not mentioning was its own kind of message, and Harry read it the way he now read everything in the gaps. The kettle took him sideways out of Privet Drive and set him down in a dim hallway that smelled of dust and gas and the staleness of a shut-up house, and he knew the place for what it was before anyone spoke, because the dead of the house came to the rail of the stairs to look at him. There were a great many of them. The shades of 100 years of one bitter family lined the upper landing and hung over the banister, pale and proud and curdled, the way the long dead go when no one has shown them the door, and they pressed toward Harry along the stairwell like iron filings toward a lodestone, and a portrait somewhere began to scream. And from a doorway off the hall a man with the gaunt good looks of a long imprisonment stepped out with his wand up and his face already changing. Harry, Sirius Black, stopped 2 strides away. Whatever greeting he had been carrying went out of him. He looked at his godson, and then he looked slowly at the air around his godson, at the crowded dark of the stairwell that he could not see and could plainly feel, and the welcome that had been on his face when he heard the kettle turn became something with no name in it. What's happened to you? It's a long story, Harry said. Hello, Sirius. Your eyes. Sirius's wand had not come down. He seemed not to know it was still up. Moony, get Moony. He's already coming. Harry could feel Remus Lupin descending from somewhere above, a warm shape worn thin by the moon, and behind him the heavier tread of Mad-Eye Moody, and Moody's magical eye, when it found Harry across the hall, did a thing Harry had not seen it do before. It stopped. It fixed on him and did not spin, did not rove, did not pierce. He looked the way the living look when they have finally met a thing their instruments were not built to measure. Don't, Harry said before Moody could speak. Whatever you're about to cast to check me, don't. It won't tell you anything, and it'll cost you more than it cost me, and I'd rather we didn't start like that. Moody's scarred mouth worked. Start like what? Like I'm something you caught. Harry set down the small bag he had brought, the only luggage he had been able to pack between dawn and dusk. I'm still me, mostly. I'm just. He looked for the word. He had been looking for it since the underpass, and the best he had found was the one the thing at the edge of the world had given him, and he was not ready to say that one aloud in a hallway full of the Black family dead. I had a bad night, he said instead. 3 weeks ago I should have written. I couldn't work out how. Sirius crossed the last of the distance then, wand forgotten, and put his arms around him, and Harry let him, and felt his godfather flinch at the cold of the threshold and not let go. Hold on through it the way you hold on to someone come up out of cold water. And over Sirius's shoulder Harry looked at the crowded stairs, at the curdled proud dead of the House of Black pressing toward the warmth of a living embrace they could no longer feel, and he understood that he could send every one of them on. Right now that they were begging for it in the wordless way of the long dead, and that it would empty him out like a poured jug and leave him on the hall floor unable to stand, and he held the sight closed and held his godfather and said nothing. You're freezing, Sirius said into his hair. Merlin, you're like ice. I know, Harry said. It passes, it doesn't pass, I don't know yet. They put him in a bedroom on the 2nd floor that had belonged to a Black who had died young, and the Black who had died young was still in it. Harry found him sitting on the windowsill when the door closed and the other's footsteps faded down the stairs, a thin shade of perhaps 19 in dress robes a century out of date, with the family's dark hair and the family's gray eyes and none of the family's pride, because pride is a thing of the living, and this one had been dead long enough to have set it down. He did not press toward Harry the way the others on the stairs had pressed. He sat where he had sat, it seemed, for 100 years, looking out a window at a London that had rebuilt itself 3 times since he last drew breath, and he turned his head when Harry came in and regarded him with the patience Harry was learning to recognize as the great currency of the dead. "You can see me," the shade said. It did not make it a question. "Yes." The others said one would come. "The portraits talk to the dead, did you know that? It is the only thing in this house worth listening to." The shade's voice was the rustle of a dry thing. "They have been saying it for a year, that death had taken a steward at last. I did not believe them. The portraits lie when they are bored, and they are always bored." He looked at Harry a while. "You are very young for it. I keep being told. Regulus would have liked you." A long quiet. "I am not Regulus. Regulus is not here. Regulus went somewhere I could not follow, and I have always wondered where, and now perhaps you can tell me. I am his uncle. I died in this room of a wasting the healers could not name in 1891, and my mother sealed the door and would not speak of me, and so I stayed because there was no one to say the words, and after a while I forgot there were words to be said." The gray eyes came back to Harry. "Are there words to be said?" "No words," Harry said, "just a door. You can open it if you want." The shade was quiet for a long moment, and in the quiet Harry felt the cost of it gathering, the price of one more thread of the warm world, and he found he did not weigh it the way the ledger in him wanted to weigh it, because the thing on the windowsill had been sitting in a sealed room for 130 years waiting for someone to remember that a door existed, and there are accounts that do not bear that kind of arithmetic. "What is on the other side?" the shade asked. "I don't know," Harry said. "I've only ever been to the doorway. I think that's the point. I think you have to go to find out, and I think the not knowing is the last thing you give up, and I think it's worth giving up because everyone I've ever opened it for went easier the moment they stopped trying to see past it. That is a poor sales pitch. It's the only honest one I've got." The shade of the black who had died young looked out the window one last time at the London that had forgotten him, and then he looked at Harry, and something eased in the gray eyes, the particular easing Harry had seen on the dead cat in Mrs. Figg's front room, the relief of a thing that has been holding a posture so long it has forgotten the posture is a choice. "Open it," he said. Harry reached into the cold place behind his ribs and opened the threshold the width of one tired man, and the shade on the windowsill drew a breath he did not need, the first in 130 years, and stood, and for a moment was 19 and well and unsealed, and then was gone, and the room was lighter, and Harry sat down on the edge of the narrow bed with the price settling into him like cold iron poured into a mold, and he put his face in his hands, not to weep, because the new place still would not let him, but to hold his own skull together while the room rearranged itself around one less waiting thing. When he looked up, the door was open, and Albus Dumbledore was standing in it. The headmaster did not come in at once. He stood on the threshold with his hand on the frame, and his eyes, which Harry had seen twinkle through every disaster of the last 4 years, were doing no such thing now. They moved over Harry and over the place on the windowsill where the shade had sat, and over the air of the room with its 130-year staleness suddenly broken. And Dumbledore, who had spent a long life being the one in the room who understood the most, looked for the first time in Harry's memory like a man standing in a country whose language he had only read about in books. "He has gone then," Dumbledore said. "Phineas's brother. He has been in this room since before I was born." He came in slowly and sat, without being asked, in the hard chair by the cold grate and folded his long hands and looked at them. "I have known this house for many years, Harry. I felt him go just now from 2 floors below, the way one feels a draft when a long-shut window is finally opened. I have never felt such a thing in my life." He raised his eyes. "I had hoped I was wrong about what I felt 3 weeks ago. I am not often wrong, and I have seldom in my life so badly wished to be." "You know what it is," Harry said. "I know what the legends say it is." Dumbledore's voice was very careful, the voice of a man laying out objects on a table that might be live. "I know that there are tales older than the wizarding world of one who keeps the door between the living and the dead, and that the wise have always treated those tales as instruction in humility, rather than as a map to a thing that might be sought. I know that I myself, when I was young and a great deal more foolish than I am now, treated them as a map." Something crossed the old face and was governed. "I went looking, Harry, a long time ago for the mastery of death. I believed I was clever enough and good enough to be trusted with it. I wanted it for reasons I told myself were noble. People died of my wanting it. I have spent the rest of my life learning to be grateful that I failed." The room was very quiet. Down in the depths of the house, the portrait that had screamed had subsided to muttering. "And now," Dumbledore said, "it has come not to one who sought it, but to one who never would have. I find I do not know whether to be comforted by that or more afraid than I have ever been." He looked at Harry with the whole of his attention. "Will you tell me what happened to you?" So Harry told him. He told it plainly, the way he had learned to give a report to people who would make decisions off it. The heat, the underpass, the 2 Dementors, the failed patroness, the cold going all the way down. He told the grey country and the thing at the edge of it. He told the offer and the refusal and the price and the second answer. He did not dress it up. Dumbledore listened without moving, and when Harry came to the part about the seekers, about the stones and the wands and the cloaks, the old man closed his eyes, and when Harry came to the part about the one who had torn his soul, Dumbledore's hands tightened on each other until the knuckles stood white. "It named him to you," Dumbledore said when Harry had finished. "Not by his name, by his crime. It said he tore his soul into pieces so he'd never have to come to the door. It called him the greatest fool it had watched in an age of fools." Harry watched the old face. "You already knew about the pieces. It was not a question, and Dumbledore did not treat it as one. He rose and went to the window and stood looking out at the same London the dead black had watched, and the morning light made him old in a way the candlelight of the castle never had. I have suspected for some years, he said, that Tom Riddle did something to himself that no wizard in living memory has dared. There's a branch of the darkest magic that teaches a man to split his soul and to seal the broken piece into an object outside his body, so that while the object endures he cannot truly die. The thing is called a Horcrux. To make one you must commit murder. The tearing is done with the act. I believe Tom made not one but several. I believe it is why he did not die that night in your nursery, why he returned, why he could climb out of a cauldron with a new body when his old one was ash. He has anchored himself to the world in pieces, and while the pieces hold, the door you keep cannot close on him. He turned. You said the thing at the edge of the world told you to close the account. It said when I found the one who'd torn himself to flee death, I should close the account. Harry was quiet a moment. I think it meant the pieces. I think I'm supposed to find them and put them back where they belong, which is nowhere, which is through the door, and you can find them. I can see one right now, Harry said. The room held still. There's a piece of him in this house, Harry said. Small, old, it came in with me. He raised his hand slowly and laid 2 fingers against the lightning scar on his forehead, which had not hurt since the underpass, which had gone, in fact, very quiet, the way a wound goes quiet when the thing that made it has finally been seen for what it is. It's been here a long time, since the nursery. It's a splinter of him that he didn't mean to leave, that broke off when the curse turned on him, and it's been sitting behind this for 14 years, listening, and it's afraid of me, headmaster. It's the most frightened thing in this house because every other piece of him is hidden in a cup or a ring somewhere far away, and this one is locked in a room with the one creature in the world that can do to it what it spent a soul trying to avoid. Dumbledore had gone very still by the window. You can feel it. The fragment, I can feel it cowering. Harry lowered his hand. It thought it was so clever, hiding inside me. It thought it had found the safest place in the world, behind the eyes of the child he couldn't kill, and then the child died in an underpass and came back as the door. He looked at his own reflection faintly in the dark glass of the grate, at the eyes Dudley had not been able to finish describing. I haven't closed it yet. I could. It would be the easiest one. But I wanted to understand the shape of the whole thing first, before I started pulling pieces of a man out of the world, because I've watched enough people get the shape of a thing wrong and call it justice, and I would rather be slow and right than fast and like him. For a long moment Dumbledore did not speak. Then he crossed the room and lowered himself back into the hard chair, and he looked at Harry the way a man looks at a bridge he has been told will hold his weight and cannot quite make himself trust. When I was young, he said, I would have given anything you are describing to possess, the sight, the dominion, the certainty of being right where others only hope. I built my whole young life around the wanting of it, and a person I loved died because I wanted it, and I have been wary of my own ambition every day since. He breathed out. And here you sit, 15 years old, holding the thing itself, and your first instinct is to be slow and right and not like him. Do you understand why that unsettles me more than if you had come to me drunk on it? Because the drunk ones are predictable. They reach too far and they fall. You are not going to reach too far. You are going to be careful and patient and entirely beyond my ability to advise, and I am going to have to learn to follow where I have spent my life leading, and I find I am not too proud to do it, only too old to do it gracefully. I'm not asking you to follow, Harry said. I'm asking you to teach me what you know about the pieces, where he'd hide them, what they meant to him, how his mind works. You spent 40 years studying him. I can see the dead and I can't see that. I need the part you have. Something in the old man's posture changed, settled, the ease of a man handed a task inside his competence at last. That, Dumbledore said, I can do. He waited until the house was asleep, which in a house of the dead is a particular hour, the one where the living have given up and the curdled shades have wearied of watching them, and then he climbed to the topmost floor to a window under the eaves that looked east over the whole sprawl of London, and he stopped holding the sight closed. He had not done it on purpose before. On the lawn it had been a door he leaned on. Now he opened it the whole way, turning at last to face a noise he had spent 3 weeks pretending not to hear, and the city came up at him out of the dark. It was not a city of lights, it was a city of endings. Every window he could see held a warm shape with its hour folded inside it, and behind the warm shape stood the cold ones, the unhoused dead of 900 years of a place that buried its people under its own streets and built again on top of them. He saw the plague pits as bruises of gray beneath the lit roads. He saw the river running thick with the drowned, patient as silt. He saw a hospital 3 miles off blazing like a forge with the freshly ending, and a churchyard near it standing quiet, its long-settled dead having found their doors centuries ago and gone, leaving the stone behind them like shed coats. He took it in all at once and did not look away, because he had decided he would rather meet it on his feet than have it leak into him sideways for the rest of his life. He set about learning the rules the way he had once set about a potion's text the night before an exam, methodically, distrusting his own first guesses. Looking cost nothing. He confirmed it by looking for a long time and feeling no colder than he had. Naming cost a little. He tested it on a waterman 3 centuries gone among the river dead, turning his attention on the shade until it raised its head toward him across 3 miles of dark, and the small chill of that reaching settled into him and stayed, a coin spent and not returned. Calling cost more, and he did not call. Laying to rest cost most of all, and he did not do it, though half the gray city leaned toward him with the wordless begging of the long unhoused, because he had run the arithmetic on the stairs that afternoon and he knew the shape of the curve now. If he spent himself emptying London, he would not see the week out, and a door that burned to nothing in a week was no door at all. There was one he nearly spent it on anyway. Down among the lit streets, on a corner he could not have named, stood the shade of a child, small and recent. A girl of perhaps 6 who had died of something quick and cold in a winter not long past and had not understood enough to find the way out, and so had stayed on the corner where it happened, waiting for a mother who came sometimes to lay flowers and could not see her, and the wanting in her was a clean, unbearable thing with no curdle in it at all. Harry looked at her for a long time across the dark city. He could open the door for her from here. It would cost him a great deal more than the old ones cost, because the recent and the unfinished always cost more. He found his attention bending toward her the way water bends toward a drain, found the cold place behind his ribs already reaching, and he stopped it. And the stopping was the hardest thing he had done since the underpass, harder than refusing the ministry, harder than holding his godfather without weeping. He stopped because if he opened the door for every child on every corner, he would be empty before he reached the one whose unmaking would close 10,000 such doors at once, and the cruelty of that arithmetic was that it was correct. He marked the corner in the ledger behind his ribs. He promised the girl nothing because the dead can tell when you lie. And he left her there waiting and carried the weight of leaving her down the stairs where it joined the rest. Then far out past the warm sprawl north and west he found the other thing. It was not a person and it was not a shade, it was a wound. A small hard knot of wrongness sitting in the dark of the country beyond the city's edge, a thing that should have crossed the threshold an age ago and had been nailed to the world instead, a fragment of a torn soul screaming without sound in a prison of metal or stone. He could not see what held it. He could only see what it was, the way you feel a splinter under the skin without seeing the wood. A piece of the death-fearer, hidden, festering, refusing the door. And once he had found the first, he found a second, fainter, further off, and the prickling certainty of a third and a fourth at the very edge of his reach, scattered across the island like coins buried by someone who has stopped trusting his own memory of where. He counted what he could. He could not be certain of the number, the far ones swam. But he understood, sitting under the eaves with the cold city turned toward him like a face, that Dumbledore had been right, that Riddle had broken himself into more pieces than one, and that each piece was a wedge holding the great door open a crack, and that the keeping he had agreed to could not be finished while even one of them held. It should have been too much for him. A boy of 15 in an attic, looking on the buried dead of 1,000 years and the scattered soul of the worst wizard of the age. But the cold place behind his ribs had no room in it for too much. It took the whole vista and laid it flat, a map, a list of work in an order that made sense, and Harry sat with the list and felt the last of his ordinary horror at it thin into something quieter and more dangerous, which was patience. He eased the sight shut slowly, the way you close a door so it will not slam. The city became lights again. He stayed a while under the eaves in the dark, and he thought that the strangest thing about what he had become was not the dead, and not the cold, and not even the wizard he would have to unmake. It was how quickly the impossible had begun to feel like a schedule. The Order did not know what to do with him, and so they did the thing institutions always do with a power they cannot place. They made a use of it and told themselves the use was a kindness. It was Moody who said it first, 3 nights later, in the basement kitchen with the gas lamps hissing and the long table crowded with the people who had agreed to fight a war the ministry insisted was not happening. They had been arguing for an hour about Rookwood, an unspeakable turned spy, killed in a skirmish at the edge of the Department of Mysteries the week before and carried off by his own side, so that what he had known of Voldemort's movements had gone into the ground with him. "The lad says he can talk to the dead," Moody said, the magical eye fixed on Harry down the length of the table. "Rookwood's dead, so—" The kitchen went quiet. Molly Weasley set down the teapot. Sirius's chair scraped. "He is not," Sirius said. "A tool you point at corpses." "I didn't say tool, I said ask him." Moody did not look away from Harry. "Well, lad, can you?" Harry was aware of the whole table watching him, of Hermione very pale beside the chair where Ron sat without a word, of the way the room had arranged itself in the days since his arrival into 2 camps that no one would name aloud. The people who looked at him and still saw Harry, and the people who looked at him and saw the cold thing in the doorway on the lawn. The first camp was smaller every day. He did not blame the second. He had felt himself becoming to a room the temperature change no one can account for. "Rookwood was a traitor twice over," Harry said. "He sold the Order to Voldemort and then he died before he could sell Voldemort to anyone. If I open the door for him to talk, he'll try to lie because lying is the only thing he was ever good at, and the dead keep the habits of the living for a while. But he can't lie to me. That's the part you don't understand yet, all of you. The dead lie to each other. They lie to themselves constantly. They cannot lie to the door. So yes, Moody, I can ask him and he'll answer true, and it will cost me something to make him, and I'll do it once because there are children at this table whose parents will die if we stay blind. But I want you all to watch while I do it. I think it matters that you see what it is before you start asking for it casually." He stood. He did not need to stand. He could have done it from the chair. But he had learned already that the living needed the ritual, needed to see the shape of a thing to believe it had cost. And so he stood at the head of the long table in the hissing gaslight and reached into the cold place and called Augustus Rookwood by his name through the door that only opened one way. The temperature in the kitchen fell. Molly's breath went to fog. The gas lamps guttered blue. In the empty air at the foot of the table, a shape gathered out of the cold, a heavy stooped figure with ink on its fingers and a hole in its chest where a curse had gone through, and it came because it had no choice, dragged up out of the dark by summons no soul can refuse, and its dead eyes found Harry at the head of the table and went wide with the look of a liar who has finally walked into a room he cannot work. Augustus Rookwood, Harry said. You spied for him inside the ministry. Tell me what you told him last, the truth, you can't do anything else now. And Rookwood, who had lied his whole life and meant to lie in death, opened his mouth, and the truth came out of him because there was nothing else left to come. The names and the dates and the planned attack on the Bones family that was 3 days off, all of it poured flat and helpless into the freezing kitchen while the Order of the Phoenix sat fixed at their own table and watched a 15-year-old hold open the door of the world and make a dead man honest. When it was done, Harry let him sink back. He did not send Rookwood through. Rookwood had not earned the rest, and there were questions yet his shade might answer, and Harry marked that thought in the ledger and disliked himself a little for the ease with which it had come. The shape sank into the cold and was gone, and the lamps came up yellow, and the warmth crept back into the kitchen, and around the table not one person was looking at Harry the way they had an hour before. Sirius found him afterward on the stairs. The Bones thing, Sirius said. That's real, we can stop it, you may have just saved a family. I know, then why do you look like you've lost one? Sirius sat down on the step beside him, close, the way he always sat, refusing the cold the way he refused most things he had decided not to accept. Talk to me, not to the room, to me. Harry looked at his godfather in the dim stairwell of the House of the Dead, and for once the cold place behind his ribs let something through, not warmth exactly, but the memory of where warmth had been. They were wary of me before, Harry said. Now they're grateful and wary, and the grateful part is worse because grateful means they'll keep asking. Every time someone dies who knew something, there'll be a reason I should open the door. And each time I do, I lose a little more of the part of me that minds losing it. I can feel the arithmetic of it, Sirius. I can feel how it ends. The version of me that doesn't mind opening the door for anyone, for any reason, because the door is just a tool and the dead are just witnesses and the cold doesn't cost anything because there's nothing warm left to spend. He turned his hand over and looked at the steady fingers. He started somewhere too, the one with no nose. Nobody is born wanting to tear their own soul up. They just keep making the reasonable choice, one reasonable choice at a time, until there's nothing left to tear. Sirius was quiet for a while, then he put his arm around Harry's shoulders, cold and all, and pulled him in and held on. Then I'll tell you when to stop, Sirius said. That's the job, isn't it? That's what you keep me around for. You do the impossible thing, and I'm the one who stands close enough to feel how cold you're getting, and I tell you when it's enough. I can do that. I've been useless at most things in this life. I can be good at that one. Harry let himself be held. Above them on the landing, the curdled dead of the House of Black pressed toward the small warmth of the two living men and could not reach it. And one floor up an empty room sat lighter than it had in 130 years, and somewhere far to the north a cup and a ring and a locket waited in their hiding places for the door to come and find them. All right, Harry said. When it's enough, you tell me. I will, promise me. I promise, Sirius said and meant it, and did not know because no one in that house could know that the dead do not break their promises and the living almost always do, and that the cruelest thing about the threshold Harry kept was that it let him see exactly how much time he had left to be held like this, and would not let him say it aloud. He stayed on the step until Sirius's warmth had taken all the chill from him that it could, which was not much and was everything. Then he went up to the room where the shade no longer waited, and he sat by the window where it had sat, and he looked out at the city full of endings, and he set himself deliberately and without flinching to learn the whole shape of what he had been made. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3, the marked sovereign the castle knew him before the students did. He felt it the moment the carriages crested the rise and Hogwarts came up black against the bruised September sky, felt the great pile of stone turn toward him the way the dead of London had turned, because a castle 1,000 years old is mostly a house for the dead, and its ghosts had been waiting at the gates since the train left King's Cross. They were not at the gates when the carriages arrived. They had withdrawn the way courtiers withdraw to the edges of a room when the one they serve walks in, and Harry climbed down into the September dark and felt them lining the walls of the entrance hall above and within, 100 forgotten dead of 100 forgotten years, none of them pressing, all of them attending. Nearly headless Nick met him at the doors. The ghost of Gryffindor Tower had drifted out to greet returning students for 400 years, jovial and faintly ridiculous, his head on its inch of skin. He did not drift now. He stood as much as a dead man can stand in the middle of the doorway with his ruff straightened and his ruined neck held as level as it would go, and he bowed low, a courtier's bow from a century when such things meant something, and he said in a voice gone formal and strange, "My lord, the house has missed you." Harry kept his own voice even. Around them, students were flowing past into the hall, and one or two had heard and were looking. Not where they can see. I'm still in 5th year. I still have potions on Thursdays. As you say, Nick straightened from the bow, and something almost like the old foolish warmth came back into his transparent face. But you should know that we are glad of you, all of us. We have been kept here a long time, Sir Nicholas and the Grey Lady and the Friar and even the Baron, kept by our own holding on and by the spells the founders laid to bind us to the work, and not one of us in 400 years has had so much as a door pointed to. You need not open it tonight. We have waited this long. It is only that there is a great difference, my lord, between waiting with no end in sight and waiting for someone who has come. He drifted aside to let Harry pass, and Harry went into the great hall under the floating candles and the enchanted ceiling that showed the same bruised sky. And the hall, which had been roaring with the noise of 1,000 reunited students, did not fall silent, because that would have been too clean. It guttered. The noise dropped and caught and dropped again, a wave losing its nerve, as table after table felt the temperature change come in among them without being able to name it. And Harry walked the length of the hall to the Gryffindor table with the cold of the threshold trailing off him like a hem, and sat down between Ron and Hermione, who had saved him a place, who always saved him a place. "All right," Ron said. It was the bravest thing anyone said to him all night, that ordinary question asked in an ordinary voice by a friend who had decided in the summer that whatever Harry had become, he was going to keep asking it. "No," Harry said, "but I'm here, pass the potatoes." Ron passed the potatoes. Hermione, on his other side, put her hand briefly over his wrist where it rested on the table, and did not flinch from the cold because she had practiced not flinching, he could tell, had spent some private effort on it over the summer so that she could do this one small thing in public and have it look like nothing. He was aware of the cost to her of the practice. He was aware of most things now. He let his wrist stay under her hand the length of a breath, which was as long as he could bear the kindness, and then he reached for the gravy, and the moment closed, and up and down the hall 1,000 students bent back to their plates and told themselves they had imagined the cold. At the staff table, 2 people were watching him and not eating. One was Dumbledore, which Harry had expected. The other was a squat woman in a cardigan the color of cough sweets, with a face like a toad and a smile arranged on it with the care of a thing that has learned smiling does not come naturally, and Harry had never seen her before and knew exactly what she was inside a heartbeat because the ministry's denial had grown itself a body over the summer and sent it to school. "Dolor's Umbridge," Hermione murmured, following his look. "Senior Undersecretary to the Minister, she's teaching defense." "Dad saw it in the Prophet. Harry, they've put a ministry person in the castle. Fudge doesn't believe Voldemort's back and he thinks Dumbledore's building an army, so he's sent her to watch." "I know what she is," Harry said. "You can't know, you've not met her. I can see what she's done." He had not meant to say it. But the sight did not switch off for politeness, and the woman at the staff table trailed her endings behind her the way everyone did, and hers were not the soft folded letters of a person who would die in bed. Hers were stained. There were deaths on the squat little woman in the cardigan, old ones and recent ones, the bureaucratic kind, the kind done with a signature and a form and a deniable distance, and most of all there was a thing he could see on her hands that the living could not, a residue, the particular mark left on a person who has made a habit of hurting children and calling it correction. "She likes it," Harry said very quietly. "Whatever she does to the ones she's allowed to hurt. She likes it, and she's careful never to admit she likes it, even to herself. That's the worst kind, the ones who'd stop if they ever once admitted what they were." Hermione had gone still. "Harry, it's all right." He picked up his fork. "She can't touch me. She doesn't know that yet. It's going to be one of the more educational parts of her year, finding out." He found out what she did to the ones she was allowed to hurt on the Thursday. The detention slip came after his first defense lesson, in which Umbridge had stood at the front of the room and read aloud from a ministry-approved text on the theory of defensive magic, and the class had been instructed to read along in silence. And Harry had asked, in a voice with no heat in it at all, whether the ministry believed theory would be sufficient when something came out of the dark that did not care what the textbook said. She had smiled her arranged smile and told him there was nothing out of the dark, that the rumors of a certain wizard's return were the lies of an attention-seeking child, and Harry had looked at her across the silent classroom and said, "Cedric Diggory died on the 6th of June. I was there, I carried him back. You can call me a liar in front of the class if it helps the ministry sleep, but the dead don't care about your press releases, and there are going to be a great many more of them, and they will all of them know your name by the time this is over because I'll have told them." It was not a threat. He had to keep reminding himself in those first weeks that the truth said plainly in a cold voice landed on people like a threat whether he meant it or not. But it earned him a week of detentions, and on the Thursday he went up to her office, which she had hung with kittens and lace and the particular suffocation of a person who decorates to drown something out, and she sat him at a small table with a long black quill and told him sweetly that he would be writing lines. "You haven't given me any ink," Harry said. "You won't need ink," the smile. "You'll be using a rather special quill of mine. Now I want you to write, 'I must not tell lies.'" He looked at the words, "I must not tell lies," which were already scarred white into the back of his left hand from the last time the ministry had tried to teach him obedience with pain, and he understood the quill before he set it to the parchment, the blood quill, the thing that cut its lines into the writer's own flesh while it wrote. And he understood that the woman across the desk was watching him with the patient anticipation of a thing that has done this to children before and intends to enjoy this one especially. He wrote the first line, the quill bit. The words rose on the parchment in his own blood, and the same words opened on the back of his hand over the old scar, and Dolor's Umbridge leaned back in her chair with the kittens mewing on the plates around the walls, and folded her hands over her cardigan and prepared to enjoy herself. And the pain went into the cold place behind his ribs, where pain went now, and the cold place looked at it, and did with it what it had begun to do with everything that was given to it, which was to weigh it and find it small and set it aside. Harry felt the cut on his hand and it was very far away, a fact about a body he was wearing, and he kept writing line after line in an even hand, and he did not make a sound, and after a while he became aware that the temperature in the lacing office had dropped, that the kittens on the plates had stopped mewing and gone still, that Umbridge's breath had begun to show faintly in the air of her own warm office, and that the anticipation on her Toad's face had curdled into something she had not felt in a very long time, which was the dawning sense that she had picked, out of all the children in the castle, exactly the wrong one. "You can feel them, can't you?" Harry said, without looking up from the parchment, still writing, his blood drying on the back of his hand. "The cold, you don't know what it is, I'll tell you, because no one else will. There are 43 dead in this castle who have died under punishment over the years, Professor. Beaten ones, starved ones, one girl in 1640 who was made to write lines with a quill very like that one until the cuts went bad and took her. They're in this room right now. They came when you opened the quill. They came because they recognized it, and they recognized you, and they have been waiting 400 years for someone who could let them be heard." He set the quill down. He turned his hand over so that the fresh cuts showed, "I must not tell lies," written in his blood over the white scar, and he looked at Dolores Umbridge across the small table, and for the first time she looked back at him and could not arrange her face into anything at all. "I'm not going to hurt you," Harry said. "I want that understood. I don't hurt people. That's the whole difference between me and the wizard you're pretending isn't back. But you are going to sit very still, and you are going to listen, because the girl from 1640 would like to tell you what it was like at the end, and I have decided that you are going to hear it." And the cold came up in the lace-hung office, and the dead of 400 years of punishment gathered at the edges of the room where only Harry could see them, and Dolores Umbridge sat frozen in her cardigan in the chair she had meant to enjoy, and listened to a thing she could not see and could not stop and would never, for the rest of her diminished life, be able to forget. Umbridge did not report what had happened in her office. There was no form for it, and a woman who lived by forms had no language for a thing that left no marks she could put in a column. But she stopped giving Harry detentions, and she stopped meeting his eyes in the corridors, and she wrote a different kind of letter to the minister, a frightened one dressed up as a concerned one, and 3 weeks into October Cornelius Fudge came to Hogwarts to deal with the problem in person. He came at night with Dolores Umbridge at his shoulder and a knot of Aurors behind him, and he came not for Harry first but for Dumbledore, because the story the ministry had decided to believe was that the headmaster was raising a private army and using a disturbed and dangerous boy as its figurehead, and a story is always easier to arrest than a fact. They went up to the headmaster's office, and Harry, who could feel them arrive the way he felt everyone arrive, was already there, because Dumbledore had sent for him the moment the ward stirred, and the two of them were waiting when the door opened. "Albus Dumbledore," Fudge said, with the brittle satisfaction of a small man performing a large duty, "you are under arrest on charges of sedition and conspiracy against the Ministry of Magic. You'll come quietly, I think, given the company present." His eyes went at Harry and slid off, the way the living eyes had begun to slide off Harry, finding the cold and not knowing what to do with it. "The child comes too. There's a place been arranged for children who can't tell truth from delusion. He'll be looked after." "He will not be going anywhere with you," Dumbledore said. He had risen from behind his desk, and he was calm in the way Harry had learned to read as the opposite of calm, the stillness of a man deciding how much of himself he is prepared to spend. "And neither, I am afraid, will I, Cornelius. You are making an error that will cost you a great deal more than you understand. I would spare you it if I could." "Seize them," said Fudge. The Aurors moved. There were 4 of them, and they were good. Harry could see that much, professionals with their wands up and their footwork clean, and the one in front, a heavy-jawed man named Dawlish, leveled his wand at Dumbledore and opened his mouth to cast, and Harry, who had not moved from where he stood by the cold hearth, decided that he had been patient long enough. He did not draw his wand. He had not drawn it on the lawn in July, and he did not draw it now. He simply stopped holding the door closed, all the way he had on the lawn, but more, because there were more dead in this castle than in all of Little Winging, and they had been waiting 400 years to be of use to the one who kept their threshold. The temperature in the round office dropped so fast the windows frosted. Dawlish's spell died on his lips. He tried again, and his wand, which had cast 10,000 curses in 20 years of service, produced nothing, not a spark, because magic is the will of a living thing imposed on the world, and the 4 Aurors had just walked into a room where the largest will present did not belong to anyone living. Their wands had gone quiet in their hands the way a wand goes quiet for a dead man. They could feel it. Harry watched the understanding move across their faces, the professional confidence draining out through the soles of their boots as the cold climbed their legs, and behind them, in the doorway and along the curved walls and rising up through the floor, the dead of Hogwarts came. They did not come as horrors. Harry had decided that too in the weeks of learning the shape of himself, that he would not make the dead into a weapon shaped to frighten, that there was a line between a sovereign and the death-fearer, and that the line ran exactly here, through the question of whether you use the dead to terrify or only let them be seen. So they came as themselves, a headmistress in Tudor black, a line of small ones from a plague year, a knight still in the armor he had died in defending these walls. The girl from 1640 who Umbridge could not see and had not stopped seeing since the Thursday in the office. They filled the round room, translucent and grave and entirely silent, and they turned, every one of them, not toward Fudge, not toward the Aurors, but toward Harry, and they waited. "You can't see them," Harry said into the frozen silence. His voice was the only warm thing in the room, and it was not very warm. "I'm sorry for that. It would be easier if you could. You'd understand faster. There are about 600 dead in this castle, Minister, and right now every one of them is in this office, and they are all of them looking at me, and none of them is looking at you, and that more than anything I could say is the thing you came here not to learn." Fudge had backed against the door. His lime green bowler had fallen, and he had not noticed. What are you?" "I'm the thing the Ministry's been too frightened to look at," Harry said. "You've been so busy pretending one wizard didn't come back from the dead that you never once asked whether something else might have. You sent Dementors after me in July, or your undersecretary did, off the books, and they're not coming back, in case you were wondering, either of them. You sent men to break my wand, they ran. Now you've come yourself to arrest an old man for the crime of telling you the truth, and you've brought 4 good Aurors into the one room in Britain where their wands won't work, and I want you to notice, Minister, that you are still alive, that all of you are still alive, that nothing in this room has so much as touched you because I am not him. I want that on the record in whatever part of you keeps records. I could empty every one of you out of your skins where you stand, and not one law of magic could stop me, and I am choosing instead to ask you to leave." The cold held, the dead held. Dawlish made a small sound, a professional sound, the noise a man makes when his whole training has just been shown to be a child's idea of the world. "You will not arrest Albus Dumbledore," Harry said. "You will not arrest me. You will go back to London and you will keep pretending, because pretending is the only thing you know how to do, and there is no time left to teach you anything better. But you will do it knowing. That's the only thing I'm taking from you tonight, Minister, your ignorance. From now on you get to be frightened with the rest of us, and frankly it's overdue. This is—" Fudge's voice cracked. "This is dark magic. This is exactly what we Dumbledore control your—" "He controls nothing," Dumbledore said quietly. "That is rather the point, Cornelius. None of us does. I spent a year trying to decide how to tell you, and I never found a way that you would hear, and so here we are in the cold, learning it the hard way, as men like us always do." He came around the desk and stood beside Harry deliberately, an old man placing himself at the side of a boy in full view of the government he had served for a century, and the gesture was not lost on anyone in the room, living or dead. "Go home, Cornelius. Take your Aurors, take Dolors, and the next time something out of the dark kills a child and you are tempted to call it an attention-seeking lie, I want you to remember the temperature of this room." For a long moment no one moved. Then Fudge bent, fumbling, and picked up his bowler and could not get it to sit straight on his head, and turned and went. And his Aurors went after him with the particular speed of men who have been released from something, and Umbridge went last. And at the door she stopped and could not help herself, and looked back, not at Dumbledore, not at Harry, but at the empty air in the corner where the girl from 1640 stood watching her with the patience of the long dead. And she made a sound and fled. The door closed. The cold lifted slowly, by degrees, and the frost melted off the windows and ran down them like the office was weeping. And the 600 dead of Hogwarts withdrew unhurried back into the walls and the floors and the long memory of the stone. And Harry stood by the cold hearth and felt the price of it settle into him, more than the cat, more than the black on the windowsill, the cost of holding open the whole door of a castle for the length of a confrontation. And he put a hand on the mantle to keep himself level and did not let it show. Dumbledore was looking at him, not with the fear of the summer, with something else. "You let them go," the headmaster said. "You held the entire dead of Hogwarts in the palm of your hand, and you used them to make a frightened man feel cold, and then you let him keep his life and his office and his dignity, such as it was, and you sent him home." He shook his head slowly. "Do you know, Harry, I have spent my life being praised for my restraint, and I have just watched a 15-year-old show me what restraint actually costs. I had thought I understood the difference between us. I did not. I understand it now." "Don't make it a virtue," Harry said. His hand was still on the mantle. "I let him go because killing him would have been easy, and the easy thing is how it starts. I'm not restrained, headmaster. I'm afraid of the easy thing. There's a difference, and I'd rather you saw it, because the day I stop being afraid of the easy thing is the day you should stop standing next to me." Dumbledore was quiet a while. "I will stand next to you," he said, "for precisely as long as you are afraid of the easy thing. That is a promise. And I will make you one more which is harder, and which I have never made to a student in my life. When the day comes that you are no longer afraid of it, I will be the one to tell you, whatever it costs me." Sirius said the same thing. "Then you are better tended than most kings," Dumbledore said, "and you will need to be. Sit down, Harry. You are grey to the lips, and there's a great deal you and I must plan, and we will do it by the fire like men, because the dead can wait and the living just now cannot." Far to the south, in a great house that had belonged to a family with a peacock's pride and now belonged to fear, Lord Voldemort listened to the report of a Dementor that had come back wrong. It had taken 3 of his servants to bring it before him, the surviving one of the pair from Little Winging, and it could not give its account in words, because Dementors have none. It gave it the way they gave everything in cold, in the lowering of the temperature of the long drawing-room until the fire died and the breath of the Death Eaters kneeling along the walls stood out in the air, and Voldemort took the account out of the creature's memory directly, and what he found there stopped him in a way nothing had stopped him since he climbed out of the cauldron. He had spent his whole long unnatural life in flight from one thing. He had killed to flee it. He had torn his soul to flee it. He had made of his own continuation a monument to the proposition that the thing he fled could be cheated, evaded, refused, and he had believed with the whole of his ruined heart that he was winning. And now a creature that fed on the soul had bent over a 15-year-old in a suburban underpass to take a child's terror as a snack, and had found behind the child's eyes the very thing it served, the very thing Voldemort had spent 60 years refusing to look at, awake and looking back. The Dementor's memory of that moment was the purest terror Voldemort had ever tasted, and it was a Dementor's terror, which should not have been possible because a Dementor is terror and cannot itself be afraid. He sat very still on his stolen throne in the cold drawing room, and for the first time in many years Lord Voldemort, who had made himself a stranger to the feeling, was visited by the suspicion that he had made a mistake of a kind he could not buy his way out of, sign his way out of, or kill his way out of, and the suspicion did not leave him, and he found he could not order it killed. "The Potter boy," he said at last, into the frozen room. "Something has happened to the Potter boy." "I want to know what, Bellatrix, my lord." She came up from the floor on her knees, radiant with the chance of it. "Not the front door, he is warded, and Dumbledore hovers, and I will not spend my best on a probe, sin the borrowed, dead." His red eyes had narrowed to slits. "I have a great many of them now, lying in the cold under London, and they ask nothing and fear nothing and feel nothing, which makes them the perfect instrument against a child who has begun to believe he is something. Send them to the village where the school children go to buy their sweets. Let us see what the Potter boy does when the dead come for him in daylight in front of everyone with the whole of his little world watching." He did not know, because he could not have known, that he had just ordered the one test in all the world that could not have gone worse for him. He had spent his life refusing to understand the dead. It was about to cost him the first true defeat of the war, and he had arranged it himself, and he had even in the arranging used the word borrowed, as though the dead were a thing that could be owned. The Inferi came up through the frozen ground of Hogsmeade on the last Saturday of October, while the village was full of children. They came out of the earth in the lane behind the three broomsticks, and out of the churned mud by the shrieking shack, and up the frozen bank of the stream, scores of them. The drowned and the buried and the murdered, gray and bloated and terrible, exactly as Voldemort had bound them to be terrible, their dead eyes milky and their dead hands reaching, and the screaming started at once, the high bright screaming of children running, and the older students grabbed the younger and ran for the castle. And three Aurors stationed in the village since the Ministry's Night of Education raised their wands and began bravely and uselessly to burn what could not feel fire. Harry walked out of Honeydukes into the middle of it with a bag of sugar quills in his hand, and stopped, and set the bag down very carefully on the step, and looked at what Voldemort had sent him. He had been waiting for this in a way, not this exactly. But for the moment when the Death-Fearer, unable to understand what Harry was, would reach for the dead as a weapon, because that was the one mistake a man who feared death would always make. He would think the dead were a thing you used, a thing you owned, a thing that could be pointed. And Harry stood in the screaming lane with the cold coming off the risen corpses, and he felt them, all of them, the way he felt every dead thing now, and underneath the binding, underneath the cruel compulsion Voldemort had laid on them to walk and reach in fright, he felt the thing Voldemort had never once in his life bothered to feel, that each of them had been a person, and that each of them was, beneath the binding, screaming not at the children, but at the wrongness of being made to chase them. "Stop," Harry said. He did not shout it. He said it the way you speak to a frightened animal, low and level. And he said it not to the Inferi, but to the dead inside the Inferi, the bound souls Voldemort had nailed back into their own rotting bodies and sent up into the daylight. And he reached into the cold place behind his ribs, and he did the thing at the edge of the world had told him he could do, the laying to rest of what has been bound against its nature. And he did it not to one but to all of them at once. And the cost of it went through him like a blade going in slow. The Inferi stopped. Every one of them, in the same instant, in the middle of the lane and at the edge of the stream and on the bank by the shack, stopped reaching, stopped walking, and stood. And the milky eyes cleared for a moment into the eyes of the people they had been, the drowned waterman and the murdered traveler and a small one who had gone into the cold ground of this village 300 years before, and they turned, all of them, away from the fleeing children and toward Harry. And they looked at him with the recognition of the dead for the one who keeps their door, and Harry held the whole binding of them in his cold hands like a knot of cold rope, and he untied it. It was not violence. The watching children peering back from the castle gates, the watching Aurors with their useless fire dying on their wands, the watching village, would all of them describe it differently afterward, and none of them would have the words, because what they had seen was not a battle. It was a release. The risen dead of Hogsmeade simply, all together, in the space of a held breath, stopped being weapons and became dead again, properly dead at rest. And where there had been scores of reaching horrors, there was, for one moment, scores of people standing in the autumn light with their faces turned toward a boy on the step of the sweet shop. And then there was nothing, nothing at all, the bodies crumpling back to the still and ordinary dead they should have been. Going down into the lane and the mud and the bank like marionettes whose single string had been cut, and a silence came down over Hogsmeade so total that the only sound in it was the stream. Harry stood swaying on the step of Honeydukes. The cost of laying to rest 100 bound dead at once had emptied him very nearly to the floor, and the world had gone thin and gray at the edges, and he was distantly aware that he had perhaps overspent, that the curve he had mapped under the eaves at Grimmauld had a bottom to it, and he had just come near it. But he stayed on his feet because the village was watching, because the children at the gate were watching, because he had learned that the living needed to see the one who kept the door stay standing, and he stayed standing. And after a moment the gray receded and the stream ran on, and somewhere a child began to cry, the ordinary frightened crying of the living, which was the best sound he had heard in months. 3 Death Eaters had come up the lane behind the inferi to watch the test and report on it. They had not expected the test to end in 11 seconds with their entire army lying down dead, and they stood now at the mouth of the lane with their masks on and their wands half raised. And Harry looked at them across the silent village, and he could see their ending standing behind them, and he could see that 2 of the 3 would die in this war regardless of anything he did, and he could have hurried it. It would have been the easy thing. Go home, he told them, the way he had told the ministry. Tell him it didn't work, tell him the dead don't belong to him, they never did. They're only lent to the world, all of us, and there's exactly one person they answer to now, and it isn't the wizard who tore his soul up trying to own them. His voice was very tired and very cold. And tell him this exactly in these words, because I want him to hear it tonight. Tell him the account is going to be closed. Tell him I've seen the pieces. Tell him I know what he did to himself, and that it didn't save him, that all it did was scatter him into things I can find, and that I'm coming for them one at a time, and that when the last one's gone there'll just be him, a frightened man with no nose, standing in front of the door the way everyone stands in front of it in the end. Tell him I'll be the one holding it open. Go, they went. They did not bother to be brave about it. They turned and ran for the apparition point beyond the village bounds, and one of them was sick inside his mask as he ran. And Harry watched them go and then sat down, finally, on the step of Honeydukes, next to his bag of sugar quills, because his legs had decided the performance was over. That was where Ron and Hermione found him, having fought their way back against the tide of fleeing students. And Ron sat down on one side of him and Hermione on the other, in the middle of the silent lane full of the twice dead, and neither of them said anything clever, and Hermione took his cold hand in both of hers and held it, and Ron put a sugar quill in his other hand and said, "Eat that, you look like death," and then went scarlet, and Harry laughed an actual laugh. Cracked and exhausted and real, the first in a long time, and the laugh was the thing that finally let the gray recede all the way. He went to Dumbledore that night, while the castle still buzzed with it, while the owls were already carrying the story to Britain that would wake to find that the ministry's attention-seeking boy had laid down an army of the dead in front of 100 witnesses without raising his wand. "I'm done waiting," Harry said. He stood in the round office where the frost had been 3 weeks before, and he was steadier now, the night's rest beginning to return what the lane had taken. "I keep telling myself I need to understand the shape of it first. I do understand it. I've understood it since the attic at Grimmauld. I was waiting because waiting felt careful, and careful felt like the opposite of him, and I used that to let myself sit still. But sitting still has a cost too. Every day I don't move, he hides the pieces deeper, and people die who didn't have to, and the dead pile up under London for him to borrow. Being careful isn't the same as doing nothing. I forgot that. I'm not going to forget it again." Dumbledore regarded him from behind the desk. "You mean to go after the Horcruxes? I mean to close the account." Harry's voice had the evenness that the living had learned to read as the edge of something. "You're going to teach me where they are the way you promised. We're going to find them, and I'm going to send every piece of him through the door, and then I'm going to find him, and I'm going to do the one thing he spent his whole life making impossible for everyone but me." He looked at the old man, and for once he let the weight of it show, just for the length of the sentence, because Dumbledore had earned the sight of it. "I stopped fighting it today, headmaster. What I am. I spent 3 months holding it at arm's length and calling that keeping my humanity. It isn't. Keeping my humanity is laying down an army so children can run home crying instead of dying, and then sitting on a step eating a sugar quill because my friend told me to. That's the part I keep. The rest of it, the cold, the door, the dominion, all of it, I'm done pretending it isn't mine. It's mine. He gave it to me himself in a way the night he put a piece of his own soul behind my eyes. I'm going to give it back to him, all of it, through the only door that doesn't open twice." The office was quiet. On the wall, the portraits of dead headmasters had stopped pretending to sleep and were watching, and one of them, a thin, sour man in a frame near the door, the one whose long-dead brother had sat sealed in a Grimmauld bedroom for 130 years until Harry opened the way, inclined his painted head very slightly, the smallest of bows. "Then we begin," Dumbledore said, "tomorrow. Tonight, Harry, you will sleep because even sovereigns must, and because the work ahead is long, and because there is one more thing I have learned in a long life that I would have you carry with you into it." He rose and came around the desk and put his old hand on Harry's cold shoulder and did not flinch. "The dead are patient, and they will wait for you forever. It is the living who cannot. Spend your patience on the dead, spend your hurry on the living. And do not, whatever else this costs you, let yourself forget which is which." "I won't," Harry said, and he went down through the sleeping castle, past the dead who lined the walls and bowed as he passed and asked nothing, to a bed in a tower that had stood 1,000 years and would stand 1,000 more, and he slept, the deep gray sleep of the very tired, and in the morning the war that did not yet know its shape had changed began in earnest to learn it. Chapter 3 Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. The Court of the Dead. There was a room beneath London where the threshold he kept had worn through into the living world, and in November Harry went down to stand in it. It took Dumbledore 3 weeks to arrange. The Department of Mysteries did not admit visitors, and the chamber Harry wanted to see was the most closely held of all its secrets. But the ministry that had come to Hogwarts in October had gone home with frost in its bones, and there were doors in the world that opened differently now when Harry Potter's name was on the request. An unspeakable met them at midnight in the atrium. A thin gray woman named Croaker who studied death for a living and had spent 40 years circling the edges of a thing she had never once been permitted to see the center of. And she led them down past the spinning room of doors into a chamber that fell away beneath them like a quarry, tier on tier of stone benches descending to a dais at the bottom. And on the dais a great stone arch, very old, older than the ministry, older than the city. And hanging in the arch a veil of some ragged, dark material that stirred without any wind. "We do not know what it is," Croaker said in the hush people used in that place. "We have studied it since before my grandmother's time. Things go in, nothing comes out. Those who stand too near hear voices and cannot afterward say what they heard. We have lost 3 unspeakables to it in my tenure alone, drawn over the edge by something none of the rest of us could perceive." She looked at Harry and her gray eyes were hungry with 40 years of unanswered questions. "You perceive it, don't you? You have perceived it since you walked in." "It's the door," Harry said. He went down the stone tiers alone. Dumbledore stayed at the top with Croaker because Dumbledore had understood the moment they entered that this was a place where he could not follow, and the old man's restraint in staying was its own kind of grace. Harry descended through the cold quarry of the chamber, and with every tier he dropped the veil grew less like a curtain and more like what it was, and by the time he stood on the dais before the arch he was no longer looking at a ragged hanging in an old stone frame. He was looking at the grey country. It was here. It had always been here behind the veil, the same plain without feature, the same light that came from no sun, the same low murmur of the last words of everything that had ever stopped. And the living had built a ministry on top of it and hung a curtain over it and lost 3 careful scholars to it and never once understood that they had built their government on the lip of the only certain thing in the world. Harry stood on the dais a handspan from the veil, and the dead came. They came not from the chamber but from the other side, pouring up out of the grey country to the inside of the veil, the way iron filings climb to a magnet through a sheet of paper, pressing against the thin dark fabric from within until it bulged with them, a great translucent crowd of the dead of all the ages gathering at the one place where their door touched the living world, drawn by the presence on the dais of the one who kept it. The murmur rose, the veil thinned to nothing. And Harry stood in the court of the dead, on the threshold of his own dominion, with the whole patient population of the ended turned toward him in the dark beneath London, and he understood in a way the attic at Grimmauld had only begun to teach him the full scale of the thing he had agreed to keep. It was not a kingdom of 1,000 or 1,000,000. It was everyone. It was everyone who had ever lived, stretching back beyond memory, beyond the first word, beyond the first fire, an assembly with no edges, and every soul in it had passed through his door or would, and every one of them, when his attention crossed them, lifted toward him the way a field lifts toward the sun. He had thought of his work as a list. He saw now that the list had no bottom. He saw the founders of the school he slept in, 4 old shades pressing to the veil with the rest. He saw kings he had read about in books, and the slaves who had built the things the kings were remembered for, equal now, undifferentiated, all of them only dead. He saw very far back in the crowd 2 shapes he did not let himself look at directly, a young man with his own untidy hair and a young woman with his own green eyes, and he held himself very still and did not reach for them because he had not come for that, and because some accounts cannot be opened in front of witnesses, and because the cost of opening that one would have put him on the stone floor and he could not afford it here. Well met, master, it was not the crowd. It was the thing behind the crowd, the edge of the grey country, the regarding horizon he had spoken to once in an underpass 3 counties and a lifetime away, and it spoke to him now through the thin veil with the patience that had not changed and would never change. "I came to understand it," Harry said. He spoke aloud on the dais, and far above him Dumbledore and Croaker saw his lips move and heard nothing. "How big it is, what I'm keeping, I needed to see. Now you have seen." The veil stirred. "This is the only place in the world of the breathing where the door stands open of itself, worn through by the weight of all that has crossed here. It is why your enemy's servants die when they come in EARIT, and why he himself has never once set foot in this chamber. THOUGH he has wanted what is kept beneath it for 40 years. He cannot bear the nearness of the thing he fled. You stand on the dais and the dead climb to you. He would stand on the dais and be unmade. That is the whole of the difference between you and it is larger than any war. The pieces of him," Harry said, "the ones he hid, I can feel them from here, stronger here than anywhere." Of course, the voice cooled, and something in it that was almost approval moved underneath. "Here the door is open, and the things that refuse the door are LOUDs. Stay where the door is nearest. Stand and look and count THEM properly, for I will not give you the number. It is not mine to give. It is yours to find, because the finding is the first half of the closing, and a sovereign who is handed the answers learns nothing and keeps nothing." So Harry stood on the dais in the court of the dead and turned his attention outward across the whole island. And from the place where the door stood open he could feel them as he had never felt them from the attic. The hard knots of wrongness scattered through the country, the torn pieces of a soul that had refused this place and nailed itself to gold and stone rather than come. He counted. He counted slowly and twice, distrusting himself. A piece in a ring in a ruined shack in a midland valley. A piece in a locket moving carried somewhere it should not be. A piece in a cup deep behind goblin gold and dragon fire under the city he stood beneath. A piece in something high and old and forgotten in the castle that was his home. A piece in a living thing, a great serpent, warm and moving, always near the death-fearer himself. and the small cowering piece behind his own eyes, quiet, terrified, listening even now. 6. And the seventh, the one that still wore a body and called itself a lord. 7, Harry said aloud to the veil. He tore himself into 7. The most unstable number of soul can be divided into and still be called a soul, said Death, and the gray country dimmed, drawing back, the crowd of the dead beginning to settle as the audience ended. He chose it for its power. He did not understand, as he has never understood anything that matters, that a thing divided 7 ways is not 7 times as hard to kill. It is 7 times as broken. Go and gather HIM, master, piece by piece. And when you hold the last of them, come back to a place like this one where the door is NEAR and finish it, and I will be waiting, as I am always waiting, at the end of everyone. The veil went still. The dead sank back into the gray. The murmur faded to the threshold of hearing, and below it, and Harry stood alone on the dais before an old stone arch with a ragged curtain in it that did not move, and the chamber beneath London was only a chamber again, cold and vast and empty, with 2 living people watching him from the top of the stone tiers. He climbed back up. It took a long time. When he reached the top, Croaker was staring at him with 40 years of hunger and a new thing under it, the particular awe of a scholar who has spent her life building a careful model of a thing and has just watched the thing itself walk down into her chamber and be greeted by name. "What did you see?" she whispered. "Everyone," Harry said. "Everyone who's ever died. They're all still there behind it, waiting." He looked at the gray scholar who had given her life to the edges of this. "Your 3 unspeakables are at rest, Madam Croaker. They went over because they heard someone they'd lost calling, and they went to them, and they're not lost. I can't bring them back, and I wouldn't if I could, but they're not lost. I thought you'd want to know that after 40 years. The door isn't a thing that takes, it's a thing that keeps." Croaker put her thin hand over her mouth and said nothing, and Dumbledore beside her bowed his white head, and Harry walked past them both toward the spinning room of doors, toward the lifts, toward the work, with the number 7 sitting in the cold place behind his ribs like a key cut at last to fit a lock he had been carrying his whole life without knowing what it opened. The trouble with seeing everyone's ending was that it did not switch off at Christmas. He had gone to the Burrow for the holidays because Mrs. Weasley had insisted, had written to Dumbledore and to Sirius and very nearly to the dead themselves to insist, and because Harry had understood that refusing would be a kind of surrender he was not ready to make, the surrender of pretending he was already too far gone to sit at a kitchen table. So he sat at the kitchen table. He peeled sprouts with Ron and let Fred and George test their inventions on him and ate Mrs. Weasley's cooking and said the right things, and the whole time the sight lay over the warm, crooked house like a second wallpaper, and he could not make it stop. Mrs. Weasley had perhaps 11 years left and a heart that would be the thing. Fred and George each had a brightness on them that did not run as long as it should, and Harry would not look at that one closely, would not let himself learn which of them or when, because there are pieces of knowledge that are simply cruelty to carry, and he had decided that one was not his to hold. Ginny would live to be old. Ron would live to be old, would grow into a heavy, contented man with grandchildren on his knee, and the relief of seeing that, the simple animal relief of knowing his friend would get the long, ordinary life Harry himself had signed away in an underpass, was the closest thing to warmth Harry felt that whole Christmas, and he never told Ron, because how do you tell someone you have seen the good death waiting for them at the far end of a good life and it made you glad? "You've gone somewhere again," Ron said. They were on the stairs late, the house asleep around them. "You do that now, you're talking and then your eyes go and you're somewhere else looking at something. Hermione says not to mention it. I'm mentioning it. What do you see when you go?" Harry considered lying. He had become good at it in the careful way of someone who lies to protect rather than to gain, and Ron deserved better than his competence. "I see how long everyone's got," Harry said. "I can't help it. I look at people and it's just there, like the color of their eyes. I try not to. With you lot, I try really hard not to." He looked at his oldest friend in the dark stairwell of the crooked house. "You're going to be all right, Ron, that's all I'll say, because I shouldn't even say that. You're going to be old and fat and happy, and there'll be kids everywhere and you'll bore them senseless about the war. I see it every time I look at you, and it's the best thing I see all day, and I needed you to know that at least once before this gets worse, because it's going to get worse, and there'll come a stretch where I'm not able to say things like this, and I want it on the record that I saw your whole long good life and it made me glad." Ron was quiet for a moment. In the dark his ears had gone red the way they did. "That's the most horrible nice thing anyone's ever said to me," he said. "You're rubbish at this. You know that, master of death, and you can't even give a bloke a compliment without making it sound like a funeral." But his voice was thick, and he gripped Harry's cold shoulder hard before he went up to bed and did not flinch, because he had stopped flinching back in the summer and had never once let himself start again, and Harry sat on the stairs a while longer and held that, the not flinching, the way you hold a coal in winter. It was 3 nights later that he felt Arthur Weasley begin to die. He was awake because he did not sleep much now, lying in Ron's room under the orange Chudley Cannon's posters listening to Ron breathe. And the feeling came up through the floor of the world the way the Dementors had come up Magnolia Crescent, a cold in a direction, except this cold had a face he knew on it. Somewhere across the country, a warm shape he had peeled sprouts beside was crossing toward the threshold fast, the letters of his ending tearing open all at once, and Harry was out of bed and down the stairs before he had finished waking, because there is a difference between a man whose hour has come and a man being hurried to the door before his time, and Arthur Weasley was being hurried. A snake. He could feel it the way he felt everything at the threshold now, the great serpent that carried a piece of the Death-Fearer's soul, the one Horcrux that lived and moved, and it had Arthur somewhere in the dark belly of the Ministry, guarding the thing under the Department of Mysteries, and it had opened him up, and Arthur was bleeding his life out onto a cold floor with no one near. Harry did not go to the veil. He went to the fire. He threw the powder and he put his head into the green flames and he raised the order, raised Sirius, raised everyone, and he told them where the exact corridor, the exact spot, because he could see it the way he could see everything, and they did not ask how he knew, not anymore, and they went, and they were in time barely, because Harry had felt Arthur cross halfway to the door and had reached out just once, just barely, and held the door shut. That was the part he never told the Weasleys. They knew he had raised the alarm. They did not know that for the 11 minutes it took the order to reach Arthur Weasley. Harry Potter had knelt on the cold hearth of the burrow with his hands in the dead ashes and held the threshold closed against a man's own blood lost by main force, had stood in the doorway of the world and refused to let it open for Arthur, not yet, not tonight, and that it had cost him more than the army at Hogsmeade, more than anything yet, because holding a door shut against the dead is harder than opening it. The way holding back a tide is harder than letting it in, and when the order's word came through that Arthur was alive, was stable, was going to keep his long, ordinary life after all, Harry had pitched forward onto the hearth and lain in the ashes, unable to move for an hour, gray to the lips, the coldest he had ever been, while the empty house ticked around him. Sirius found him there at dawn, having come back from St. Mungo's to tell him Arthur would live, and found him instead curled in the cold grate like something washed up, and gathered him out of the ashes and held him, swearing softly and did not ask, and carried him to the sofa and built up the fire he could not feel and sat with him until the gray went out of his face. "You held it shut," Sirius said when Harry could speak. It was not a question. Sirius had been getting better at the things that were not questions. "Didn't you? You didn't just ring the alarm, you held the door." "I had to," Harry said. His voice was a thread. "He wasn't supposed to go tonight. It wasn't his. I could feel it wasn't his. There's a difference between letting someone through when it's theirs and being made to open it before it's time, and the snake was forcing it, and I held it shut. That's allowed. That's the job, actually. Keeping the door means keeping it closed as much as open. I just didn't know it cost that much until I did it." "And if it had been his," Sirius's voice was careful, "Arthur's time, if you'd felt it was really his tonight, would you have held it shut anyway?" It was the right question. It was the question Sirius had appointed himself to ask, the cold gauge question, the one that stood between Harry and the easy thing, and Harry loved him for asking it even as it cut. "No," Harry said. "If it had been his, I'd have let him go and held his hand on the way and made it gentle and grieved him. That's the line, Sirius. I don't get to keep people past their time just because I love them. The day I start doing that is the day I've become what he is, a man so afraid of losing people that he tears the world to keep them. Arthur wasn't his time, so I fought. But I have to be able to tell the difference, every time, with everyone, even you, especially you, and I have to be willing to let go when it's real, or none of this means anything." He looked at his godfather in the gray dawn light. "That's the actual cost, not the cold. The cold's nothing. The cost is that I'm the one person in the world who's never allowed to keep someone past their time, because I'm the only one who could." Sirius was quiet for a long time. Then he pulled Harry in against his shoulder, against the cold, and held on and said into the top of his head roughly, "Then I'm doubly glad it's you and not the other one, and not me and not anyone I can think of. Because you're right, and being right about that at 15 in the ashes after a night like this is the most frightening proof I've ever had that the thing at the edge of the world chose well." He tightened his arm. "Now sleep, I've got you, the door can wait, sleep." And Harry for once slept, against the warmth he could barely feel, in the arms of a man whose ending he had not let himself look at in 5 months, and would not, because that was one account he could not bear to know the balance of before it came due. Britain had decided in the weeks after Hogsmeade what he was, and it had decided wrong, and there was nothing he could do about it. The prophet had turned overnight. The paper that had spent the autumn calling him a deluded, dangerous child printed, the Monday after the lane filled with the twice dead, a photograph of Harry standing on the step of Honeydukes with 100 fallen in fairy around him, under a headline that used a word he had not chosen and could not unchoose: sovereign. They had got it from somewhere, the word, perhaps from a frightened aura, perhaps from the air itself, and once it was printed it could not be recalled, and by the new year there was not a witch or wizard in the country who did not know that the thing in the underpass had a name, and the name was a crown. He felt the change the next time he walked through Diagon Alley. He had gone with Sirius on an ordinary errand, and the alley which had always swallowed him into its crowd parted. It was not dramatic. No one screamed, no one pointed. The British did not do that. They simply found, as he came down the cobbles, that they had business on the other side of the street, that a shop window had grown suddenly fascinating, that it was time to gather the children in. A space opened around him and traveled with him, a moving island of cobblestone, and through the gaps in the parting crowd he saw the faces, and the faces all wore the one expression, the stillness Mrs. Figgs had worn on the night of the Dementors, the look of people in the presence of a weather they could not argue with. A child broke the rule. A girl of perhaps 6, too young to have learned the fear, slipped her mother's hand and ran out into the cleared space and looked up at Harry with frank curiosity, and her mother made a sound and lunged for her, and Harry crouched down on the cobbles to the child's height before the woman could reach her. "You're the one who talks to dead people," the girl said. My Gran's dead, is she all right? The alley had gone silent around them. Sirius had gone very still, the mother had frozen with her hand out. Was her name? Harry asked. Mabel, the girl said. She made currant buns. Harry was quiet a moment and looked not far, just a little, the smallest reach, the cost of a single name. Mabel's fine, he said. She went through the door a long time ago and she's at rest and she doesn't hurt anywhere anymore and she's not waiting on a corner or stuck in a house. She found her way out clean, which most people do, which is the thing nobody tells you because nobody knows it but me. She's all right. You can stop worrying about her, that's allowed. The girl nodded, satisfied in the enormous casual way of the very young, and went back to her mother, who snatched her up and fled, and the alley breathed out, and Harry stood up off the cobbles into silence that had changed its texture, gone from the fear of a weapon to something more complicated, the fear of a thing that had crouched down to child's height and been gentle, which is a harder fear to hold and a worse one because you cannot simply hate it. You shouldn't have to do that, Sirius said quietly as they walked on through the parting crowd. Reassure people about their grands in the street, it's not your job. It's exactly my job, Harry said. It's the only part of the job I actually like. The rest of it, the cold, the unmaking, the war, that's the price. That the grand, that's the thing the price buys. If I ever stop being able to crouch down to a kid in the street and tell her the truth about her gran, then I've become the other thing and you should put me through the door yourself. It was that week that the deputation came. They came to Hogwarts, three of them senior ministry, sent by a fudge who had stopped pretending and had not yet found the courage to come himself. And they were shown into a side room off the Great Hall, and they had prepared, Harry could tell, a careful speech full of words like cooperation and arrangement and mutual interest. And they got perhaps 2 sentences into it before the eldest of them, a stooped man who had served 4 ministers and buried 2, simply stopped. And looked at Harry across the table and said what they had actually come to say. We don't know what to do, he said. Minister Lord, whatever you are, we have no procedure for you. You laid down an army of the dead in a public street. You turned our Auror's wands to wood in the headmaster's office. The prophet calls you sovereign, and the people believe it, and half the Wisengamot has begun privately to wonder whether they should be taking their instructions from the ministry or from you. And the dreadful thing, the thing that kept me up the whole of last night, is that I could not give them a reason why the answer was the ministry. He spread his old hands on the table. So we have come to ask plainly, what do you want? Tell us, and let us at least know the shape of the thing we are living under. Harry looked at the 3 frightened officials, and at the offer folded inside their question, the throne they were halfway to handing him out of sheer terror of the alternative. And he understood that this was a kind of test too, a quieter one than the Dementors or the ministry's wands, and that failing it would be the easiest thing in the world. I don't want the ministry, Harry said. I don't want your chair or your Wisengamot or your instructions running through me. I'm 15. I want to finish my potions homework, and I want a wizard who tore his soul into pieces put back together and sent where he should have gone. And after that I want, more than I can tell you, to be left alone to do the only job that's actually mine, which is the door and the dead and telling little girls the truth about their grands. You can keep your government, I don't covet it. A man who covets the living world is exactly the thing I exist to stop. He leaned forward and the cold came with him, just a breath of it enough. But understand me, I won't take your throne and I won't let you use mine. You will not point me at your enemies. You will not ask me to make dead men talk for your convenience the way the Order did until I taught them better. I keep the threshold. I am not your weapon and I am not your king. And if that leaves you without a procedure, then I'm afraid you'll have to do the thing you've avoided your whole careers, and simply be brave and govern and let me do the one thing only I can. Now go home. And tell Cornelius that the next time he wants to know what I want, he can have the decency to come and ask me himself. They went. And Britain settled over that long strange winter into the shape of a country with 2 powers in it. One that ran the trains and printed the money and pretended it was in charge, and one that lived in a school in the north and answered to nothing but death, and wanted nothing the first power had, and was, for exactly that reason, the only thing in the world it could not control. The first piece was in a ruin in a valley, and they went for it in the new year, on a grey afternoon with the light already failing. Dumbledore had found it the slow way, the human way, through 40 years of patient research into the orphan Tom Riddle had been, through the records of an old wizarding family fallen into squalor and madness, the Gaunts, last descendants of Salazar Slytherin, who had owned among their few remaining treasures a ring with a black stone, and a shack at the bottom of a valley where nothing grew. Harry had found it the other way, from the dais beneath London, a knot of wrongness in a midland valley that matched the place on Dumbledore's map exactly, and the 2 of them had stood over the map and the 2 kinds of knowing had lined up, the scholars and the sovereigns, and that, Dumbledore said, was how they would do all of it, his patience and Harry's sight, the old way and the new, until the work was done. The shack was worse than its photograph. It crouched at the bottom of the dead valley with a snakeskin nailed to its rotted door, and the air around it was thick with old dark magic, curses layered on curses by a paranoid line of inbred wizards over generations, and Dumbledore stopped at the boundary of it and tested the wards with a care that told Harry, more than any words, how dangerous this place was to the living. There is a curse on the ring itself, Dumbledore said. I can feel it from here and I do not like the feel of it. It is the kind that is meant not to keep a thief away but to punish one. Tom always did prefer his protections to hurt. He looked at Harry. I had intended when I found it to take the curse myself. I'm old, Harry. I have perhaps a few good years left, and I had thought to spend one of them buying this if it came to that. It seemed a fair price. It isn't a price you're paying, Harry said. Wait here. Harry, you'd take the curse and it would kill you. Slowly and badly over a year, and you'd hide it and pretend, and I'd have to watch, and at the end I'd have to open the door for you anyway, having lost a year of your help and gained nothing. Harry was already walking toward the shack. I died in July, Headmaster. Whatever that ring does to the living, it can't do to me, because the thing it threatens me with is the one thing I've already done and come back from. Curses that punish a thief with death are useless against the one person in the world death works for. Wait here, watch the valley. If I'm wrong, you'll know and you can write it up. He went in. The inside of the shack was a single rotted room, and the dark magic in it pressed on him the way deep water presses, but it pressed on the body, and Harry had learned in the underpass that the body was a thing he was wearing, and he walked through the curses with the cold place behind his ribs registering them and setting them aside, small, far away, weighable. The ring was under a loose stone in the floor in a box, and the box was a nest of the worst of the protections, and Harry put his hand into them the way you put your hand into a fire to pull out a child, knowing it will hurt and that the hurt does not matter, and he took out the ring. It was gold and ugly and set with a heavy black stone cracked down the middle, and a symbol was carved into the stone, a triangle and a circle and a line, and Harry knew the symbol, had seen it in the margin of an old book Dumbledore had shown him, the mark of the three deathly hallows, the wand and the stone and the cloak that the Seekers across the ages had hunted, the three objects that legend said would make their possessor the master of death. The Seekers had wanted them so badly. Men had died for them. And Harry stood in a rotted shack holding one of the three in his bare hand, the resurrection stone, the stone that called back the dead, and felt almost like laughing because the joke of it was so old and so cruel. The thing the Seekers had torn the world apart to find, the thing that was supposed to grant mastery over death, sitting in the palm of someone who had been given that mastery for free by death itself, and did not need a single one of their toys to wield it. But the ring was not only the stone. The Death-Fearer had taken a hallow, an object older and stranger than himself, and he had defiled it, had driven a piece of his torn soul into the black stone and sealed it there, so that the thing legend said could touch the dead had been made a prison for a fragment of the wizard who feared them most. And the fragment, when Harry's hand closed on the ring, began to scream. It was the scar fragment's scream, the same note, the silent shriek of a piece of soul that has refused the door and now feels the door's keeper closing his fingers around it. Harry held the ring up in the failing light of the dead valley, and he looked at the screaming piece of Tom Riddle nailed into the heart of a hallow, and he felt no anger at it, which surprised him, only a kind of weary recognition, the recognition of a thing that should not be where it was, a thing out of its proper place, a wound in the order he kept. You don't get to stay, Harry told it quietly. I know you're afraid. The one behind my eyes is afraid too. I'm not going to hurt you because there's nothing left of you that can be hurt. You're not a person. You're a torn-off piece of one who decided he was more important than the law that holds the whole thing together. You're just a splinter, and splinters come out. He reached into the cold place and he opened the threshold the width of one screaming fragment, and he laid it to rest. It did not go easily, the way the cat had gone, the way the black on the windowsill had gone with relief. It went the way a thing goes that has spent every ounce of its existence refusing to go, fighting, clawing at the edges of the door. And laying it to rest cost Harry more than a willing soul ever did. A deep grinding cost like setting a bone, and the black stone in the ring went from cracked to shattered in his hand, and a thin shape of darkness tore out of it and was dragged down through the door, shrieking into silence. And then it was gone, the first of 7, sent where it should have gone 14 years before. And the valley was quiet, and Harry stood in the rotted shack with a broken hallow in his palm and the cost of it settling into his bones. He came out slowly. Dumbledore was waiting at the boundary, and his face when he saw Harry walk out whole, alive, uncursed, with the broken ring in his hand, was the face of a man watching the impossible become ordinary in front of him for what was not the first time and would not be the last. It's done, Harry said. The piece is through. The ring's broken. The curse never touched me. He opened his hand and showed the shattered black stone. It was a hallow, Headmaster, the resurrection stone. He drove a horcrux into the resurrection stone. He took the one thing in the world that could call the dead and he used it to hide from them. He laughed once without any humor in it at all. He had it in his hand, the thing the Seekers all died wanting. And he never once understood what he was holding, because understanding it would have meant looking at the door, and he could never look at the door. Dumbledore took the broken ring when Harry offered it, turned it over in his old fingers with infinite care, and his eyes, when they lifted, were wet. There is a thing the stone is said to do, the Headmaster said quietly. Even broken, perhaps, especially for one such as you. It is said to bring back the dead, not as ghosts and not as the living, but as something between, close enough to speak to, close enough to see. He looked at Harry, and there was a terrible gentleness in it. You saw them, Harry, at the Vale. I watched your face. You saw your parents in the crowd of the dead, and you did not reach for them. And now you hold the stone that would let you call them here in your hand. I am an old man who has made every mistake there is to make about wanting the dead back, and I find I cannot tell you what to do with this. I can only watch and hope you are wiser than I was. Harry looked at the broken stone in Dumbledore's palm for a long time. He wanted them. That was the truth under the cold, the warm, unbearable truth that the threshold had not been able to freeze out of him, no matter how much of the rest it took. He wanted his mother and his father, wanted them with the whole of who he had been before the underpass, and the stone was right there, and he was the master of death, and there was no one in all the world with more right to use it, and no one with more power to make it work. No, he said. He closed Dumbledore's fingers over the broken stone gently. I see them every day, Harry said. That's the thing nobody understands about what I am. I don't need the stone to call them. I could call them tonight with nothing, just the cold place behind my ribs, and they'd come because they can't refuse me, because nothing dead can refuse me. That's exactly why I won't. They're at rest. They walked to the door with their arms open, both of them, and they earned what's on the other side. And if I call them back, even halfway, even just to talk, I'm telling them their rest is worth less than my wanting. I'm doing the thing he does. I'm putting what I want above the law that holds it all together. His voice was steady and very cold, and underneath the cold something shook just slightly, the proof that the warm thing was still in there, still costing him. The whole job is wanting to open the door and not doing it unless it's right. I held it shut against Arthur's blood because it wasn't his time. I'm holding it shut against my own parents because it is theirs. Same door, same law, no exceptions, or it's all just power, and power without the law is only him with a better excuse. Dumbledore bowed his head over the broken ring, and his shoulders moved once, and when he looked up the wetness had spilled over, and he did not bother to hide it. I am 115 years old, he said, and I have just been taught the meaning of restraint by a child standing in a cursed ruin holding the means to his own heart's desire. Keep the stone, Harry, not to use, to carry. So that every day you choose not to use it, you are reminded what the choosing costs, and so that on the day you face him you will hold one of the 3 hallows in your pocket as the proof of the difference between you, that you mastered death by refusing the easy thing and he only ever ran from it. He pressed the broken ring back into Harry's hand. 1 down, 6 remain, and the snake and the fragment behind your own eyes, and riddle himself at the end of it. Let us go home. There is a locket next, I think, and it has been moving, and I want to know who has been carrying it. They walked up out of the dead valley together in the last of the grey light, the old scholar and the young sovereign, the broken hallow in Harry's pocket, the first piece of the Death Führer sent through the door at last, and behind them the shack at the valley's bottom settled a little further into its rot, one curse lighter, one wound in the world closed, and the long work which had a bottom to it after all was begun. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. Kings and Dark Lords kneel. The locket had been moving, and then it stopped moving, and when it stopped Harry knew the place at once, because the Death Führer had hidden it in a monument to his own terror, and terror was a thing Harry could read off the world like a name carved in a wall. It was a cave in a cliff above a cold northern sea, reached through a fissure that wanted blood to open it, and Dumbledore had read about such places in the dark histories, and Harry had felt it from the dais beneath London, and they went together on a night of high wind with the sea roaring at the foot of the cliff. The blood the fissure wanted, Harry gave it, a cut across his palm that healed before the boat across the black underground lake had carried them halfway, because the cold place behind his ribs mended the body faster than it used to, as though the body mattered less to it every week. The lake was full of the dead. Voldemort had filled it. He had taken the bodies of the poor and the friendless, the ones no one would miss, and he had drowned them and bound them and sunk them in the black water as in Fairy, a drowned army to tear apart any thief who reached for his locket, and Dumbledore in the boat gripped his wand and looked at the still black surface with the grimness of a man who has read the histories and knows what is under it. There will be a great many of them, Dumbledore said, more than at Hogsmeade. And down here in the dark with the water to drag us under, fire will not serve us as it did. Harry, whatever you mean to do, do it from the boat and do it fast. I'm not going to do anything to them, Harry said. That's the part he never understood. They're not his army. They were never his army. He drowned them and he bound them and he told himself he owned them, and not one of them ever stopped being a person under the binding, screaming the way the ones at Hogsmeade screamed. He trailed his cut hand in the freezing water, and the water was very cold, and it did not matter. He built me a lake full of people begging to be let go, and he set them to guard the thing he loves most, and he thinks that's clever. Watch. He did not raise his voice, and he did not raise his wand. He let his hand rest in the black water, and through the water he touched every drowned and bound soul in the lake at once, and he did not command them, and he did not weaponize them. He freed them. The lake began to glow, not with fire. With the pale light of the threshold opening, 100 doors opening at once under the black water, and the Inferi rose, all of them, but they did not rise to attack. They rose the way the dead of Hogsmeade had risen, the milky drowned eyes clearing, the bound limbs going slack, and they turned their ruined faces up through the water toward the boat where Harry sat with his hand in the lake. And one by one, then in their scores, then all together, they let go. They went down through the doors he had opened for them, down into the rest the Death Führer had stolen from them, and the black lake filled with light and emptied of the dead in the space of a long breath. And where there had been an army there was only water, clean, cold, ordinary water, and the boat drifting on it, and the cost of 100 doors at once sitting in Harry's chest like a stone dropped down a well. Dumbledore was staring at the dark water, at the last of the pale light fading out of it. You emptied the entire lake, he said, his whole defense in one stroke, and you freed every soul in it. Same stroke, Harry said. His voice had gone thin with the cost. That's the thing about the door headmaster. Freeing them and disarming him aren't two different acts. They're the same act looked at from two sides. He could never use that because to him the dead were always a tool, and you can't free a tool, you can only break it. I don't break them, I let them go. And letting them go happens to be the one thing that ruins everything he's built, because everything he's built is a prison. The boat bumped against the central island. He gave me 100 more reasons to do exactly what I came to do, and he thinks he made a fortress. Get the basin, the locket's under the potion, and the potion's the only part of this that might actually trouble us. The potion troubled them less than Voldemort had intended, because the potion was death in a cup, despair distilled, a thing meant to fill the drinker with the certainty of his own ending and the longing for it. And it was poured for the living, and Harry was not anymore entirely that. He drank it so Dumbledore would not have to, scooping the green liquid out with the conjured cup, and it went into the cold place behind his ribs where everything went now, and the cold place looked at the despair and the longing for death the way it had looked at Umbridge's quill, and found it almost funny, the Death-Fearer trying to torment the Master of Death with visions of dying. He saw things. The potion made him see things, his parents in the green light, Cedric in the long grass, Sirius falling away from him into a dark he could not follow, and that last vision was so sharp and so specific that it stayed with him after the others faded, a splinter of a thing not yet happened, but he set it aside with the rest, because the potion lied the way everything that feared death lied, and he had stopped trusting the testimony of frightened things. He drank the basin dry. He took the locket from the bottom. And the fragment in the locket, when his hand closed on it, screamed the now familiar scream, and Harry opened the door the width of one more torn-off piece and sent it through, and the locket fell open and dead in his palm, and the second of the 7 was gone. Dumbledore got him back across the lake. Harry was past speaking by then, hollowed by the lake and the potion and the unmaking, gray to the lips and shaking. And Dumbledore pulled the little boat across the black water with an old man's careful strength and talked to him the whole way, steady nonsense, the names of sweets, the standings of Quidditch teams, anything to keep him on the near side of the door he had spent the night holding open for others. And Harry held on. Because Sirius was waiting at the top of the cliff with a flask of something hot and a promise to keep, and because he had learned that the way you stayed human through the cold was to have people at the top of the cliff worth climbing back up to. The cup was in a bank, and the bank belonged to the goblins, and the goblins, it turned out, had been waiting for him longer than anyone. Harry had not expected that. He had braced for the hardest negotiation of the war, for a proud and ancient people who answered to no wizard guarding their vaults against the one wizard no door could keep out. And instead, when he walked into the marble hall of Gringotts with Dumbledore at his shoulder, the goblins stopped. All of them. Every quill stopped scratching, every scale stopped swinging, and the old goblin at the head desk, a creature so ancient its skin had gone the color of the marble it sat among, climbed down from its high stool and crossed the hall and looked up at Harry with black eyes that had counted the gold of 1,000 dead wizards, and bowed from the waist, the way the goblins bowed to nothing that walked on 2 legs and called itself a person. "We know what you are," the old goblin said. "We have always known the dead better than your kind. We dig in the deep places. We hear them in the gold, which remembers every hand that held it. When the door took a steward at last, we felt it in the vaults, a change in the weight of things, and we have wondered when you would come and what you would want and whether we would have to fight you for it." The black eyes were steady. "Tell us what you have come for, keeper of the door, and tell us truly, for we will know a lie as you will." "There's a cup in the Lestrange vault," Harry said. "Hufflepuff's cup. It has a piece of a torn soul nailed inside it, a thing that should be dead and isn't, and it's making the gold around it sick if you felt it, a wrongness in the deep getting worse. I've come to take it out and send the piece where it belongs. I'm not here for the Lestrange's gold, I'm here for the wound in your vaults. After tonight it'll be gone and the deep will be clean again, and that's the only payment I want, the clean deep, because a wound in the dark down there is a wound in the thing I keep." The old goblin regarded him a long moment. "The wrongness in Vault 711, it said. We have felt it for 50 years and named it the Lestrange curse and warded our diggers away from that level. You are telling us it has a cure. I'm telling you I am the cure. Take me down, let me cut it out." And the goblins of Gringotts can say after that when the Master of Death came to their hall he came as a surgeon and not a thief, and that they showed him the way and that the deep places have been clean ever since. Harry inclined his head, the first time he had bent it to anyone since the underpass, a small grave courtesy to an old and honest people. "I'd rather have you with me than under me. I think most things would go better that way. I think it's most of what's wrong with the world that the powerful so rarely ask." And the goblins of Gringotts, who had bowed to no wizard in 1,000 years, took the keeper of the door down into the deep, past the dragon and the thunderous falls, to the vault where the cup sat poisoning the dark, and they stood back, grave and watchful, while Harry reached into the gold and took out the cup of Helga Hufflepuff, and held the screaming fragment in his cold hand and opened the door and sent it through. The wrongness went out of the deep all at once. The old goblin, 50 feet back, closed its black eyes and breathed out, and Harry understood that he had just done, for an ancient people, a thing their own magic had failed at for half a century, and that he had done it by asking instead of taking, and that this, more than the army at Hogsmeade, more than the lake, was the shape he wanted his dominion to have if it had to have a shape at all. 3 down. The cup, the locket, the ring. The diadem next, and it was close, it had been close all along, hidden in his own home in a room that hid things, and he had left it for last among the objects because some part of him had wanted to be sure of his hands before he went looking for a piece of the Death-Fearer inside the walls of the place he slept. The hunt was taking a toll that did not show on the outside, and Hermione had started keeping a record of it. She did it the way she did everything, methodically, in a small notebook she thought Harry had not noticed, and what she was recording was the cold. How far it reached off him now, In the autumn, you had to touch his hand to feel it. By the time the cup was gone, you could feel it from across a room, a thin wrongness in the air around the Gryffindor table, and the first years had begun, without knowing why, to leave a seat's gap on either side of him, and Harry had noticed the gap and said nothing because there was nothing to say that would close it. "You're spending faster than you're recovering," Hermione said. They were in the library late, the three of them at their usual table in the back, and she had finally stopped pretending the notebook did not exist and laid it open between them. "I've been tracking it since Christmas. Every time you unmake one, the cold goes further and it takes longer to come back, and it's not coming all the way back anymore. The lake nearly finished you. You were gray for 3 days. Harry, you've got the diadem still and the snake," and she did not say the last one. None of them said the last one aloud, the fragment behind his eyes, the piece of the hunt that was hunting from inside his own skull. "I'm a healer's worst nightmare. I know I'm doing arithmetic on my best friend, but somebody has to because you won't, and Sirius isn't always in the room, and if you spend yourself to nothing before the end, then he wins by default, and I am not going to let him win by default because nobody did the sums." Harry looked at the notebook, at the careful columns in Hermione's small handwriting, the dates and the distances and the recovery times, the graph of himself going cold, and he did not tell her to stop because she was right and because the record was an act of love dressed up as arithmetic, which was the only kind of love some people could let themselves give, and he respected it too much to wave it off. "You're not wrong," he said. "I am spending faster than I recover, that's true. It's also the only way this ends because every day I wait, he hides deeper and more people die, and a slower hunt that keeps me warm longer is still a hunt that loses. So I'm trading years off the far end for speed at the near end. I know I'm doing it. I decided to do it in the attic at Grimmauld, and I've never once stopped deciding it." He closed the notebook gently and slid it back to her. "Keep the record, I mean that, not so you can stop me. So that someone afterward knows exactly what it cost, line by line, in case anyone ever tells the story as though it was easy, like I was always this and it never hurt. You're the proof it hurt, that's a thing worth being." Ron, across the table, had been very quiet, building a small unsteady tower out of broken quills the way he did when there was a thing too large in him to say straight. "My mum cried when she heard you save Dad," Ron said abruptly to the quills. "Did I tell you that? She doesn't know you held the door the way Hermione worked out, she just thinks you rang the alarm. But she cried and she said that boy gave us back your father and what did it cost him, and I didn't have an answer, and now I do. It cost him 3 days gray on a hearth and a year off the far end, and he did it anyway for my dad who he's known 5 years. Ron's tower fell over. He looked up and his eyes were bright. "I'm rubbish at this, I said it before. But you're the best person I know, and you're getting colder, and I just want it said while you can still hear it warm that we see it. The cost. We see it, mate. You're not spending it alone in the dark. We're keeping the record, both of us, all of it." Harry sat between the two of them in the late library, the cold reaching off him further than it ever had, and he let the record be kept, and he let himself be seen, and it was, he thought, the thing Sirius had appointed himself to provide, and the thing the Weasleys gave without being asked, and the thing that, more than the wand or the sight or the door, was going to be the difference between him and the wizard he was hunting. That when he went into the cold, there were people who counted the cost out loud and refused to let him pretend it was free. The diadem was in the room of hidden things, where the castle put what it wished to forget, and Harry walked up through 1,000 years of abandoned objects to a bust wearing a tarnished crown, and he did not even have to reach for it, because the fragment felt him coming and began to scream while he was still 3 aisles away. He took the diadem of Ravenclaw off the bust and held it and sent the fourth piece through the door, there among the lost things in the room side around him, lighter by one wrongness, and he set the clean diadem gently back on the bust where it had waited 1,000 years to be a crown again instead of a coffin. 4 down. He came out of the room into a corridor that had been empty when he went in and was not empty now. Bellatrix Lestrange had come to the castle. She had come the hard way through a gap in the wards that Voldemort's panic had spent good servants to open. And she had come alone, which told Harry something, that the Death-Fearer had sent his most devoted rather than his most numerous, that this was not an assault but a message, that Voldemort had felt his anchors dying one by one over the winter and had reached, in his mounting dread, for the one servant mad enough to walk into the keeper's own house. She stood at the end of the corridor with her wand up and her heavy-lidded eyes bright with the joy of violence, and behind her, where only Harry could see, stood the dead she had made, a long crowd of them, the tortured and the murdered, the Longbottoms not among them because the Longbottoms still lived in their broken way, but so many others, a retinue of the slain following the one who had slain them as the dead followed everyone waiting. "Eichel Baby Potter," Bellatrix crooned, "who thinks he's a god. The Dark Lord wants to know what you are. He sent me to find out." Her wand twitched. "I'm going to take you apart very slowly and ask you the whole time, and you're going to tell me because everyone tells me in the end." "Bellatrix," Harry said, "do you know how many dead you've made?" She laughed. "I lost count, baby. That's rather the point. You lost count, I haven't." He walked toward her down the corridor unhurried, and he did not draw his wand, and she sent a curse at him, the green one, the killing one, the one she had used so often and so gladly, and it crossed the space between them and struck Harry full in the chest and did nothing at all because it was Death's own curse and it had come home to Death's own steward, and it guttered against him like a candle in a draught and went out. Bellatrix's mad bright face changed. "They're all here," Harry said, still walking. "Everyone you lost count of. They came when you came. They've been waiting for you, Bellatrix, the way the dead wait for everyone, and they've got nothing to do to you because the dead can't touch the living. That's the law, that's the mercy. But I can see them and I can hear them, and I'm going to do the one thing in all the world you've never once had done to you in your whole long, cruel life." He stopped an arm's length from her, close enough that her killing curses fell dead off him like rain off a roof, close enough that the cold of him stood her breath out in the air. "I'm going to make you listen to them." He did not raise the dead against her. He had promised himself in the round office in October that he would never make the dead into a weapon shaped to frighten, and he kept the promise even here, even with the woman who had tortured Neville's parents into ghosts who still breathed. He did not have to. He simply let her hear for one moment the way he heard, opened her to the murmur of the slain the way the door opened to him. And Bellatrix Lestrange, who had never in her life been made to feel a single thing she did not choose, heard the voices of everyone she had killed all at once, not accusing, not screaming, just present, just there, just real, each of them a person she had decided did not count. And the weight of all that reality coming down on a soul that had spent 50 years insisting nothing was real but her own pleasure broke something in her that no curse could have broken. She went down. Not dead, he had not killed her, would not kill her, the killing was the easy thing. She went down onto the stones of the corridor with her hands over her ears and her wand forgotten, and a sound coming out of her that had no madness in it at all. Only the very old, very human sound of a person meeting, far too late, the cost of what they have done. "I'm not going to kill you," Harry told her, crouching down to her height the way he had crouched to the child in Diagon Alley, and his voice had no cruelty in it, which was the most terrible thing about it. "Death would be a mercy and you haven't earned one. You're going to live, Bellatrix. You're going to live a long time and you're going to keep hearing them because I've opened you and I'm not going to close you, and every quiet moment for the rest of your life they'll be there, all the people you decided didn't count being real at you. That's not a punishment, I don't punish. It's just the truth finally arriving. Most people get it gentler and sooner. You got it all at once and late. Go back to him. Tell him I send his messenger home alive and hearing the dead. Tell him I thought he should know what that's like before the end, since he spent his whole life making sure he never would." She crawled away from him down the corridor and got to her feet and fled, and she did not crow and she did not laugh. And Harry stood in the empty corridor with the diadem clean behind him and the 4 pieces gone and the cost of the day sitting in him. And he found, examining himself the way he examined everything now, that he did not feel triumphant and did not feel cruel and felt mostly the old tiredness. The tiredness of a person doing a necessary thing carefully so that it would not turn him into the thing he was undoing. Far to the south, Lord Voldemort felt the fourth anchor die, and then his most faithful servant came back to him broken and hearing voices, and for the first time since he had climbed out of the cauldron he understood that he was losing. He did not understand it the way a general understands a losing war, as a problem of forces and positions. He understood it the way a drowning man understands water. He had built his whole existence on a single proposition, that death could be cheated, that he had cheated it, that the pieces of himself scattered and hidden across Britain were a fortress no one could breach, and one by one over a single winter the pieces had been going dark and he could feel each one go, a light winking out in the map of himself, and with each one the old terror he had spent 60 years outrunning gained another stride on him. He had the snake still. He kept it close now, closer than ever, the great serpent that carried a piece of him, never more than a room away, because it was the only anchor he could see and guard, and the seeing of it had become a kind of comfort, the way a frightened man keeps a light burning. And he had Potter, of course, who did not know, Voldemort was certain Potter did not know, that he carried a piece of his enemy behind his own eyes, that the Death-Fearer had nailed a fragment of himself into the very steward of the door, the safest hiding place imaginable, inside the one creature death itself would never destroy. It was the snake in Potter then. 2 anchors left that he could find, and Potter was the cleverest hiding place he had ever made, and Voldemort, in the cold drawing room of the house that Fear had built, began in his terror to construct a plan around the certainty that Harry Potter did not know what he carried. He would draw his enemy out to the one place that enemy could not resist, the place beneath the ministry where the prophecy that had started all of this still hung waiting to be heard. He would draw him there and he would take him and he would learn what Potter was, and he would discover, surely, some leash, some price, some way to bend the keeper of the door to the will of the one who feared it most. He did not know that Potter had already counted the pieces. He did not know that his enemy could feel the snake from across the country, and the fragment behind his own eyes, and the place beneath the ministry where the door stood open of itself. He did not know that the trap he was building had been seen in its entirety from a stone dais beneath London months before he thought of it. He knew only that he was afraid and that the fear was gaining on him and that he had to do something, and so he did the thing frightened men always do, which is to reach for the one they have decided to blame and pull and call the pulling a plan. "Bring him to me," Lord Voldemort told his shaking court. "Bring me Potter alive to the Hall of Prophecy. I will learn what death is made, and I will unmake it, and then there will be only the snake, and the snake I will never let out of my sight again, and I will live forever, as I was always meant to, whatever the door believes." His court bowed and did not tell him what every one of them had begun to suspect, that there was no leash on the thing that wore Harry Potter's face, that you could not bargain with the door, that the only beings in all the world who answered to nothing were death and its steward, and that the Dark Lord in his terror was arranging a meeting between himself and the precise thing he had spent his entire life fleeing. Harry knew it was a trap, and he went anyway because the trap had been built around a room he needed to reach. He had seen it from the dais months before, the place beneath the ministry where the door stood open of itself, the one place in the living world where the threshold was worn through, and he had told the thing at the edge of the world that he would come back to a place like that when he held the last of the pieces and finish it. He did not hold the last of the pieces yet. The snake remained and the fragment behind his own eyes. But Voldemort had decided to gather his court in the death chamber, to spring a trap in the one room in Britain where the door was nearest. And Harry understood the gift of that, the death fearer arranging the confrontation in the precise place least survivable for a man who feared death. And he decided to accept the invitation on his own terms with the order at his back, because some doors you do not get to choose the timing of, and this one had opened itself. They went down at dusk, a dozen of them, Sirius and Lupin and Moody and Kingsley and the rest, through the spinning room of doors to the great descending chamber with the arch and the veil at the bottom. The Death Eaters were waiting in the Hall of Prophecy above it, a dozen masked figures around a glowing sphere that held the words that had shaped Harry's whole life, and Lucius Malfoy stepped forward with the prophecy in his hand and an offer on his lips, and Harry looked at the masked court of the Death Fearer and felt all through the rooms around them the dead of the department, the lost unspeakables and the older dead beneath them, and the great worn-open door at the bottom of the chamber. And he did not bother with the offer. "You've brought me to the one room where I'm strongest," Harry said, "and you don't even know it, none of you. He sent you down here to a place he won't come to himself because he can't bear the nearness of it, and he sent you to fetch a thing he thinks is a boy. He let the prophecy sphere alone. It was only words, and the words had never mattered as much as everyone believed. I don't want the prophecy. Smash it if you like. I came for the room underneath you. Stand aside or don't. It's the same to me either way. It went wrong the way fights go wrong, fast and sideways and without dignity." Someone cast, the prophecy shattered unheard. And then the Hall of Prophecy was full of curses, and the Order was fighting, and the masked court was fighting, and the whole roaring tangle of it spilled down, level by level, into the great chamber of the arch, and Harry moved through it not casting because he did not need to cast, because curses crossed him and died, but the others were not him. The others were the living, and the living could be hurt, and he could not be everywhere. He turned the dead loose to shield them. Not as weapons, as walls. He let the lost dead of the department rise between his people and the curses, translucent and grave, and the curses that would have killed Lupin and Tonks and Kingsley passed through the dead and spent themselves harmless, and the Death Eaters, firing into a chamber that had filled with the silent standing dead, began to come apart at the seams of their courage. It was working. It was nearly done. The masked court was breaking, fleeing up the tiers, and Harry was 3 strides from the dais and the worn-open door, and Sirius was at his shoulder, laughing, alive, fighting the way he did everything with his whole reckless heart. And Rodolphus Lestrange, fleeing half-mad with the terror of the dead crowding the chamber, turned at the lip of the dais and threw the killing curse blind over his shoulder at nothing at the cold, and it took Sirius black in the chest as he laughed, and Sirius went backward off the dais into the veil. Harry was already moving. He was on the dais before Sirius's body reached the arch, and he caught the veil with his sight the way he had caught it in November, and the door, the worn-open door that stood ajar of itself in this one room in all the world, was right there, and Sirius was going through it, and Harry reached. He could pull him back. He knew it with absolute certainty, standing on the dais with the chamber roaring behind him and the dead all turned to him and the veil open under his hands. This was the one place where the door stood open, and he was the keeper of the door, and Sirius had not gone far, was right there, a handspin past the veil, and Harry could reach through and take his godfather's hand and pull him back into the warm world, back into his life, back to the promises and the stares and the arm around the shoulders, and no law of magic could stop him and no power in the living world could gainsay him, and he wanted to. He wanted to with the whole of the child who had been chosen in an underpass, and the whole of the orphan who had spent his life collecting the few people who loved him, and the whole of every warm thing. The cold place behind his ribs had not yet managed to freeze, and he reached, and his hand was at the veil, and Sirius was there. And Sirius, on the other side of the veil, in the first instant of the gray country, turned and saw him reaching and understood the way the dead understood everything and said, "No." It was the last word, and it was a gift, and it was the cruelest kind of love. Harry stood with his hand at the veil and heard his godfather, 3 seconds dead, refuse the rescue. "No," Sirius said again, and his shade was already easing, already taking on the calm of the newly through. The calm Harry had seen on the cat and the black on the windowsill and the lost unspeakables, the deep relief of a thing that has set down a weight it carried so long it forgot it was a weight. "That's the easy thing, Harry, you told me. You made me promise to tell you when you were about to do the easy thing, and I can't reach you from here to tell you, so this is me telling you. This is the job, isn't it? This is the door, it's mine, I can feel it's mine. You can feel it too, you felt it your whole life, you're just too kind to say it. Don't you dare pull me back and make me the proof that you're no better than him. I'd rather be dead and proud of you than alive and the thing that broke you. Let go, you brilliant, cold, terrible, wonderful boy, let me through. It's the last thing you can do for me and it's the hardest, and you're the only one who can, so do it, and then go finish him and live and be the thing you are and let me rest." Harry stood on the dais with the chamber gone silent behind him, The fighting stopped, the dead all watching, the order all watching, and he held the open door in his hands with his godfather a handspin beyond it telling him to close it. And he made the choice that was the whole of what he was, the choice that separated the keeper of the threshold from the wizard who tore the world to keep what he loved. He let him through. He opened the door the width of one beloved man, and he did not pull, and he did not hold, and he let Sirius Black go through it into the rest he had earned. Gently, the way Harry had promised on the hearth at the burrow that he would let go when it was real, and it was real, it was the realest thing that had ever happened to him, and Sirius's shade smiled, the old reckless grin, free of the cold at last, and went, and the veil stilled, and he was gone. The cost of it was not the cold. The cold was nothing. The cost was that Harry had done it himself with his own hands, the one death in all the world he would have torn down the sky to prevent, and he had instead opened the door for it, because the law had no exceptions, and he had said so, and he had meant it, and now it had come for the person he could least afford, and he had kept it anyway. That was the price of the crown, the real one, the one the thing at the edge of the world had warned him of in an underpass, and he had not understood until this exact moment on a stone dais beneath London. That he would love them and they would die, and he would be the one who had to open the door every time, even this time, especially this time, and there would be no mercy in it for him, because the mercy was all for the dead, and the keeper got none. He stood on the dais a long moment. Behind him the Death Eaters had fled, all of them, up and out, carrying word to their master that his trap had taken one of the order and that Potter had stood on the threshold and let it happen and not wept. They did not understand what they had seen. None of the living ever would, except perhaps Dumbledore, and perhaps far away in a cold drawing room, a man who would hear the report and feel, for the first time, a sliver of something he had no name for, which was the dawning horror of a creature who has just learned that the thing hunting him does not even fear the loss of what it loves, that it will pay any price, that there is no leash, that there was never going to be a leash. Lupin reached him first. He put his hand on Harry's shoulder on the cold, and his face was wet, and he opened his mouth and could not find anything to say, and Harry said it for him, quietly, the only thing there was. "He's at rest," Harry said. "I felt him go, it was his, Remus, it was really his, and I let him through clean, and there was no pain in it at the end, only relief. He's not lost, he's not behind the veil waiting. He went all the way through to the rest, and it's good there, it's the one thing I know for certain in all of this, that it's good on the other side, and he's in it." His own voice did something then, the first time in a year the cold place had let it, a single fracture, quickly governed. "I'd give anything to have pulled him back, that's how I know I was right not to. The day I do pull someone back is the day I've started wanting it more than I love them, and Sirius would rather be dead than watch that happen to me, and he told me so with his last word from the other side of the only door that doesn't open twice. So I let him through, and I'd do it again. And it's the worst thing I've ever done, and it's the most human thing I've ever done, and those are the same thing now, and that's what I am." He went home through the spinning room with the order silent around him. And that night in the tower he let himself grieve, once fully alone in the dark where no one could see the keeper of the door weep for a man he had sent through it with his own hands. He allowed himself the night. In the morning he set it down, the way he set everything down now, into the cold place where the costs went, and he found, examining himself, that the grief had not frozen. It sat warm in him, unbearable and warm, the proof that Sirius had been right, that there was still something in him worth dying proud of. 2 pieces left that he could reach. The snake, warm and moving, never far from the death-fearer. And the fragment behind his own eyes, quiet, cowering, the last and the strangest, the piece of his enemy he carried in his own skull. And then the death-fearer himself at the end of it, the one who had heard the report from the death chamber and understood finally that he had arranged a meeting with the precise thing he feared, and had learned nothing he could use, and had only one move left, which was the move of all cornered things. Harry stood at the tower window in the gray morning and looked south toward the house that fear had built, and he was very cold and very tired and entirely without doubt about what came next. "I'm coming," he said, to the south, to the snake, to the fragment, to the death-fearer. "Soon, hold on to your last anchors, it won't help, nothing helps, that's the whole thing you never learned." Chapter 5 and Chapter 6, the death-fearer Voldemort tried once to go into Harry's mind, and what happened to him there changed the war. He had been certain it would work. The connection had been there since the night in the nursery, the thread the curse had left between them, and he had used it before, had sent Harry visions, had felt his rage and fed on it. He did not know that the thread now ran into a place that had no bottom. He decided in the cold drawing room in the days after the death chamber that if there was no leash to be found in the world outside Potter, then he would go inside, down the old thread, into the mind of the steward of the door, and find the lever there, the fear, the wound, the thing that every mind had that could be pressed. He gathered himself and he went down the connection in the dark of a March night into Harry Potter's sleeping skull. He did not find a mind, he found the threshold. It was waiting for him, the way a drop is waiting for a man who steps off a roof in the dark. Voldemort poured himself down the thread, expecting the cluttered, warm rooms of a teenage mind, the memories to twist, the loves to threat, and instead he came out into the gray country, the real one, the one behind the veil, because that was what lay behind Harry's eyes now, that was what the steward carried in the place where other people kept themselves. The door open and the whole patient population of the dead, and the regarding horizon at the edge of everything, turning slowly toward the intruder. For one moment Lord Voldemort, who had spent 60 years and torn his soul 7 ways to ensure he would never stand in this place, stood in this place. He felt the cold that was not cold but the absence of every warm thing. He heard the murmur of the last words of everyone who had ever ended. He saw the door and he understood with the whole of his diminished and scattered self that it was for him, that it had always been for him, that the account he had refused to balance for 60 years was right there, and the interest was a number that no longer fit in his mind. And he felt the attention of the thing at the edge come around to him and recognize him, and he heard it speak not to Harry, not to him exactly, but about him the way a man might remark on a coin he had been waiting a long time to spend. "There you are," said Death. "I have wondered when you would come within reach. Not yet, not here, but soon. The steward is not ready and I am patient. Go back to your little house of fear, and count your last 2 coins, and know that I have seen you now, and that being seen by me is the beginning of the end of being able to pretend." Voldemort tore himself back up the thread so violently that he ruptured something in the connection, and on his end he came back into his own body in the cold drawing-room screaming, the first sound of pure animal fright to leave him since he was an orphan in a cot in a place that did not love him, and his Death Eaters along the walls heard their master scream and did not understand and would not be told, and from that night the thread between Voldemort and Harry was burned closed. Because Voldemort would sooner have cut off his own hand than reach down it again. He had learned, finally, the thing his court had not dared to tell him. There was no leash. There was no lever. Harry Potter was not a boy with a weapon. He was the door wearing the shape of a boy, and behind his eyes was the precise place Voldemort had built his entire existence to avoid, and there was nothing in there to bargain with, threaten, or corrupt, because it was not a mind anymore in any way Voldemort understood minds. It was an end with a face. And in the wreckage of that understanding, in the small hours of that March night, Lord Voldemort conceived his last strategy, which was not a strategy to win, because he had finally grasped that he could not win, but a strategy to be right. He could not beat the steward of the door. But he could perhaps prove that the steward was no better than himself, and that would be a kind of victory, the only one left to a man who had built his life on the proposition that power over death was worth any price. If he could make Harry Potter into a tyrant of the dead, if he could force the keeper of the threshold to raise the dead as weapons, to bend the living to his will, to become a cold thing that answered to nothing and feared nothing and loved nothing, then Voldemort would have been proven right all along, that mastery of death was a horror, that the thing he had reached for and the thing that had chosen Harry were the same thing wearing different masks, and he could go through the door at last if he had to. Knowing that he had dragged the steward down into the dark with him, so he stopped hiding. The hiding had been the strategy of a man who thought he could survive, and he no longer thought that, and a man with nothing left to lose is a more dangerous thing than a man with everything. He gathered the dead he had been hoarding under London and elsewhere, the great drowned and buried armies of Inferi, every corpse his servants had stolen and bound over the long years, and he prepared to spend all of them at once, not to win a battle, but to commit a horror so large that the keeper of the door would have to choose in front of the whole watching world between letting thousands of innocents die and using the dead as an army to stop it. And Voldemort had convinced himself that either choice was his victory. A Harry who let them die was a monster, and a Harry who raised the dead to save them was a monster of a different shape, and there was no third door. He did not understand, because he had never once in his life understood it, that there was always a third door, and that the steward of the threshold had spent every day since an underpass in July learning exactly where it was. Harry felt the snake before he felt the army. He had been hunting it for weeks, the sixth piece, the one that lived and moved, and Voldemort had kept it so close, never more than a room away, that reaching it had meant reaching Voldemort, and Harry had been unwilling to force that confrontation until the snake was the only anchor left between the Death-fearer and the door. Now the ring was gone, and the locket, and the cup, and the diadem, and the only pieces of Tom Riddle still nailed to the world were the serpent and the splinter behind Harry's own eyes. And Harry stood at the tower window one gray dawn and felt the snake stop moving far to the south, felt it coil down into stillness in the cold drawing-room of the house that fear had built, and felt all around it the slow, terrible gathering of the dead. He understood the strategy at once. He had been waiting for it in a way since Bellatrix had crawled away down the corridor hearing voices. Voldemort had run out of places to hide and run out of ways to win, and a thing that cannot win and cannot hide does the last thing available to it, which is to try to make its destroyer into a reflection of itself, so that it can die believing it was never alone in the dark. The army of the dead massing under London was not meant to defeat Harry. It was meant to corner him in front of everyone into a choice that would prove the Death-fearer right. "He's going to spend all of them at once," Harry told Dumbledore in the round office in the grey light. "Every Inferius he's made in 20 years, thousands. He'll send them somewhere full of people, somewhere I can't ignore, and he'll make me choose between watching innocents die and raising an army of the dead to stop it, and he thinks both of those make me him." Harry looked out the window toward the south. He spent his whole life unable to imagine a person who would refuse the easy thing. So he's built his last move out of the assumption that I can't either. It's almost sad. He's about to lose the war by being unable to picture mercy. "And can you refuse it?" Dumbledore asked quietly. It was Sirius's question, the cold gauge question, and Dumbledore had taken up the asking of it the way an old man takes up a burden a younger one has set down. If he sends thousands of the dead against a city full of the living, and the only thing that can stop them in time is for you to take command of them the way only you can and turn them the way only you can you find a third door fast enough? Or will you have to choose between the two he has built for you? There's always a third door, Harry said. He's just never been able to see it because finding it requires the one thing he threw away first. He turned from the window. It requires being willing to pay the cost yourself instead of making someone else pay it. He sends thousands of dead. I don't raise them as an army and I don't let them kill anyone. I lay them to rest, all of them, at once. The way I emptied the lake, it won't be a battle, headmaster. It'll be the largest single act of mercy in the history of the world, and it will very nearly kill me, and that's the third door, that's the one he can't see, the one where I don't command the dead and I don't abandon the living. I just open the door for all of them and pay for it out of myself. He's bringing me an army. I'm going to set it free, and the freeing is going to cost me more than anything has ever cost anyone. And that's exactly why it's the right door, because the right door always costs the one who opens it and never the ones who walk through. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. It may kill you, he said, truly, even you. Then it kills me doing the one thing that proves him wrong, Harry said, in front of the whole world, and Sirius gets to be right about me, and the door gets a new keeper, and the account still closes because I'll have left him nothing but the snake and the splinter and his own bare soul standing in front of a threshold with no army left to hide behind. He picked up his wand from the desk, the holly and phoenix feather, the first thing that had ever been his. But I don't think it'll kill me. I think I've got exactly enough left for one more impossible mercy and one frightened man. Let's go and meet his army, headmaster. It's time he learned what the third door looks like. Voldemort did not send his army against a city. He sent it against the castle because the castle was where the steward slept, and because he wanted the whole of the wizarding world to see the keeper of the door make his choice on the one stage they would never look away from. They came at moonrise across the loch and down from the hills, and Harry stood on the walls of Hogwarts with the defenders ranged behind him and watched the Death-Fearer spend everything he had. The Inferi came first, thousands of them, a grey tide pouring out of the water and the earth. Every corpse Voldemort had stolen and drowned and buried over 20 years of preparing for a war he had always meant to win by refusing to lose. And behind the tide came the Dementors, 100 of them, gliding down the cold air, and behind the Dementors came the living servants, the masked court, and behind them all, on the far hill, small and pale and certain, came Voldemort himself. With the great serpent coiled at his feet, come at last out of the house that Fear had built to watch his masterpiece, the cornering of the Master of Death. The defenders on the walls had their wands up. Behind Harry, the teachers in the Order and the older students who had refused to leave stood ready to fight a battle they could not win, against an army that could not feel their curses, and Harry felt the readiness of them, the brave, hopeless readiness of the living preparing to sell themselves dear, and he stepped up onto the parapet alone above them all between the castle and the tide. Don't, he said to the defenders without turning. Wands down, all of you. This one's mine and you'll only spend yourselves on it, and I'm going to need you after for the part that's actually a fight. Watch, and remember what you see because no one will believe it who wasn't here. He looked out at the gray tide climbing toward the walls, thousands of the bound dead set on tearing apart everyone he had ever sat at a table with, and he did the arithmetic one last time, the curve he had mapped under the eaves at Grimmauld a year and a lifetime ago, and he knew it would take him very nearly to the bottom, knew this was the largest single spending of himself he would ever attempt, knew that Hermione's notebook had no column wide enough for what he was about to pay. And he reached into the cold place behind his ribs, the place that had been a boy's ordinary warm chest before an underpass in July, and he opened the door as wide as he had ever opened it, wider, wide enough for an army, and he did not command the dead, and he did not raise them, and he did not turn them against their maker, though every one of those would have been easier, and the easy thing was always how it started. He set them free. The whole gray tide stopped at once. 3,000 bound corpses halfway up the walls of Hogwarts stopped reaching, and the milky drowned eyes cleared altogether into the eyes of 3,000 people who had been stolen from their rest and made into weapons. And they turned every one of them away from the castle, away from the living they had been sent to kill, and toward the figure on the parapet who had opened the door, and Harry held 3,000 threshold doors open at once with his bare and freezing soul, and the dead went through. It was the most beautiful and terrible thing anyone on those walls would ever see. The pale light of the threshold bloomed across the whole hillside, 3,000 doors opening into the gray country, and the bound dead poured through them out of their stolen bodies, and into the rest the Death-Fearer had robbed them of rank upon rank. A whole army laying itself down, not slain, not destroyed, freed, and the gray corpses crumpled back to the still and ordinary dead they should always have been, sinking down into the grass and the loch and the cold earth. And where there had been a tide of horror climbing the walls there was, in the space of 30 endless seconds, only a hillside of the peacefully dead under the moon, and a silence so vast the defenders on the walls wept into it without knowing they had begun. And on the parapet Harry Potter went down on one knee, and then onto both, grey to the lips, emptied very nearly to the bottom of the well, the cost of 3,000 mercies settling into him like the cold of the grave itself, and the Dementors who had come to feed and found the threshold opening doors by the thousand fled shrieking back up the sky, every one of them unable to bear the nearness of the thing they served working at full and terrible flood. He had done it. The third door. He had refused both of the Death Führer's choices and found the one Voldemort could not imagine. And he had paid for it himself, all of it out of himself, and the whole wizarding world had watched the Master of Death lay down an enemy army as the largest act of mercy in the history of the living. And not one innocent had died, and not one of the dead had been made a weapon, and Voldemort on his far hill had watched his entire strategy, his proof, his last way of being right, dissolve into pale light and rest. So Voldemort changed the game, because that was the thing about a man who feared death above all else. When he could not win and could not even be right, he reached for the one move that was always left to the cornered, which was to make someone else pay what he could not. He turned his wand on the defenders on the walls. He could not touch Harry. He had learned that in the worst possible way in the gray country behind Harry's eyes. But Harry was on his knees, emptied, and the people behind him were living and ordinary and could be hurt. And Voldemort, screaming his rage across the hillside, began to kill them. The green light leaping from his wand and across the distance into the defenders on the walls, into a seventh-year Harry had shared a dormitory tower with, into one of the teachers, into the bodies of the living that Harry emptied to the bottom, could not shield and could not save in time, and Voldemort screamed as he killed them. Screamed the thing that was the whole of him, the thing he had built his life around. You see, keeper of the door, raise them and stop me, or let them die and be no better than I am. There is no third door for this one. Use the dead or watch the living fall. That is the choice. That was always the choice. We are the same, you and I. We have always been the same, and now the whole world will see it. And Harry, on his knees on the parapet, emptied, with people he loved dying behind him under the green light, felt the temptation come up in him like the tide had come up the walls. He could raise them. The ones just falling, the newly dead, the seventh year and the teacher, their threads still warm right there, a handspin from the door, and he could call them back and stand them up and turn them, and the whole army of the recently slain with them, and he could meet Voldemort's horror with a greater one. Could rule this battlefield and every battlefield with the risen dead, could stop the green light by becoming a thing the green light could not matter to, and it would be so easy, it would be the easiest thing he had ever done. Easier than letting Sirius go, easier than leaving the girl on the corner, and the people he loved were dying, and the cold place behind his ribs, emptied and desperate, reached toward the warm new threads of the falling with a hunger he had never let himself feel before. This was the cost, not the cold, not the loneliness. This. The moment on his knees with his strength gone and the people he loved dying and the easy, terrible answer right there in his hands, and Voldemort screaming that they were the same, and a part of Harry, a real part, the emptied, desperate part, wanting to prove him right just to make the dying stop. He did not raise them. He knelt on the parapet with his strength gone and his people dying and the easiest answer in the world warm and waiting in his hands, and he heard Voldemort screaming that they were the same, and he found at the very bottom of the emptied well of himself, the thing that had been there the whole time, under the cold, under the dominion, the thing the threshold had never been able to freeze out no matter how much of the rest it took. He found Sirius's last word. He found the girl on the corner he had left at rest. He found his mother walking to the door with her arms open. He found, in short, the part of him that knew the difference between opening the door and forcing it, and he held to it the way a drowning man holds to the one fixed thing, and he did not reach for the warm threads of the falling, though it cost him more not to reach than any reaching ever had. No, Harry said. He got one foot under him, then the other. He stood up on the parapet, gray as ash, swaying, emptied very nearly to nothing, and he looked across the hillside at Lord Voldemort, who had stopped screaming, who was watching now with the first true uncertainty of the whole war on his ruined face, because the keeper of the door had been handed the perfect provocation, the unbearable one, and had refused it standing up. No, Harry said again, and though his voice was a thread, the whole hillside heard it, because the dead carried it, the freed dead of the army, lingering one last moment at their 1,000 doors to hear the steward answer. We are not the same. You spent your whole life needing us to be the same, because if I'm no better than you, then your whole life wasn't the obscenity it was just a thing anyone with power would have done. But I'm not going to give you that. You can kill every person on this wall, and I will grieve every one of them and open the door for every one of them gently and let them through to the rest. And I will not raise a single one of them to save the others, because the moment I do, you're right and you don't get to be right. That's the third door, Tom. It's the one you could never see. It's the door where I lose the people I love and stay myself anyway, because staying myself is the only thing in all of this that was ever actually mine to keep. The defenders behind him had stopped dying because Voldemort had stopped casting, because something had gone wrong in the Death Führer's understanding of the world that he could not name and could not fix. He had built his last move on the certainty that no one would refuse to use the dead to save the living. And someone had, on his knees emptied with his friends falling, and the refusing had not made Harry weak. It had made him the one thing Voldemort had never once been in 60 years of clinging to existence, which was free. Now, Harry said, and he came down off the parapet, and the cold came with him, the last of it, scraped up off the bottom of the well. Let's deal with your snake. The masked court broke before he reached them. They had come to watch a cornering, and they had seen a miracle and a refusal. And the difference between those is the difference between an army and a mob, and the Death Eaters who had stood firm against the prospect of a battle could not stand against the sight of the steward of the door walking down off the wall toward them gray as death and entirely unhurried, with 3,000 freed souls fading at their doors behind him like a fall of pale snow. Some apparated, some simply ran. A few, the truest, the maddest, stood their ground around their master on the far hill, and Harry walked through the curses they threw the way he had always walked through curses, registering them, setting them aside, and they saw their killing magic die against him one after another and understood far too late what their master had understood in the Grey Country, that there was nothing here to fight that you cannot duel a door. Voldemort stood on the hill with the snake. He had kept it close all this time, the last anchor he could see and guard, the great serpent that carried the sixth piece of his torn soul, and now he stood over it with his wand in his hand and his red eyes moving over Harry's approach, and the certainty had gone out of him entirely, and what was left was the thing that had always been underneath the certainty, the thing he had spent 60 years and 7 soul fragments building a fortress around. The small cold dread of the orphan who had decided very young in a place that did not love him that death was the enemy and that he would beat it whatever it cost the world. "Stay back," Voldemort said. His voice was not the voice that had screamed across the hillside. It was quieter and there was a crack in it. "Stay back or I will." "You'll what?" Harry said. He did not stop walking. "Kill me? You've tried. It comes home to me, the green light. Kill them." He nodded back at the wall, at the living and the newly dead. "You've done that and it didn't make me you, which was the only thing you wanted it to do. There's nothing left in your hand, Tom. You spent your army and it set itself free. You spent your court and it ran. All you've got left is a snake with a piece of you in it and a piece of you behind my eyes that you don't know I know about, and your own bare soul standing in front of a door it can't bear to look at. I'm going to take the snake now. And then it's just you and the splinter and the door, and we both know how that ends, and we've both known since you sent a Dementor to an underpass and it came back wrong." The snake struck. It came off the hill in a single great uncoiling lunge, faster than thought, the way it had opened Arthur Weasley in the dark of the Ministry, fangs wide, straight for Harry's throat, and Voldemort's whole hope went with it, the desperate hope that the thing carrying his soul could do what his curses could not. And Harry, who had been emptied to the bottom by 3,000 mercies, who had nothing left, who should have had nothing left, found the one last cold coin at the very floor of the well, and as the great serpent reached him he caught it, not with his hands, with the door opening the threshold the width of one serpent in the half-second of its strike, and the sixth piece of Tom Riddle's soul met the keeper of the threshold at last, the screaming familiar fragment, and Harry sent it through. The snake came apart in the air, not bloodily, that was not Harry's way, and it was not the way of the door. The great body simply lost the thing that had bound the torn fragment into it and became, in the instant of its strike, a dead snake, an ordinary dead snake falling, and it struck the grass at Harry's feet and lay still, and the sixth of the 7 was gone, sent where it should have gone, and there was in all the world one piece of Lord Voldemort's soul left outside his body, and it was behind Harry Potter's eyes, and the Death-Fearer did not know it. And the only piece he could still call his own was the bare and ragged mane of him, standing on a hill with nothing left to hide behind. Voldemort looked at the dead snake, he looked at Harry, and on his ruined white face, for the first time in the entire war, in the entire long, unnatural arc of his existence, there was no plan, no certainty, no fury, no contempt. There was only the thing he had spent everything to never feel, naked at last, the small terror of the orphan grown enormous, the understanding that the account was open and the interest was due and there was nothing in all the torn pieces of him that could pay it. He fled. He did the thing he had always done, the only thing he had ever truly been good at, the thing his whole existence had been one long elaboration of. He ran from death. He apparated off the hill with a crack like the world breaking, fled north and away, fled to the one place left that might still hold a wall between himself and the door, fled without his army and without his court and without his snake and without, though he did not know it, the last piece of his own soul, and Harry stood on the dark hillside among the peacefully dead and let him go for now because the chase was over and only the ending was left. And the ending could wait the few hours it would take Harry to climb back up from the bottom of the well. He turned back to the castle. The defenders were coming down off the walls, slow, stunned, into the hillside of the freed dead, and there were bodies among the living ones, the 7th year, the teacher, the ones Voldemort had killed to try to break him. And Harry went to them first, before he rested, before he did anything, and he knelt by each one in turn, and he opened the door for each one gently, and he made sure each one went through clean to the rest, the way he had let Sirius go, and he grieved them openly on his knees. In front of the whole watching school, because the keeper of the door had decided long ago that he would never become a thing that did not grieve, and grieving them where everyone could see was the last and best proof that the Death-Fearer had been wrong about him to the very end. The morning came gray over a hillside of the peacefully dead, and the wizarding world woke to a thing it had no framework for. The story went out faster than any owl could carry it. The Master of Death had stood on the walls of Hogwarts, and an army of 3,000 dead had been sent against him, and he had not raised a single one of them against the living, had instead set every one of them free, the largest mercy in the recorded history of magic, and had paid for it himself until he could not stand, and then had refused, on his knees with his own friends dying behind him, to become the thing the Dark Lord wanted him to be. By noon there was not a witch or wizard in Britain who did not know it, and the knowing changed something that the army at Hogsmeade and the night in the round office had only begun. The world had been afraid of him. Now it was something more complicated and more durable, the thing a people feels toward a power that has proven, at the worst possible moment under the worst possible pressure, that it will not be turned. Not love, which is too small a word, and not worship, which he would have refused, but a grave and permanent trust, the trust you give to the one fixed thing in a world of shifting ones. Harry slept the day through, gray and still, climbing up out of the bottom of the well 1 hour at a time, and Hermione sat by him with her notebook and did not write in it, because there was no column for what he had spent, and she had decided finally that some costs should not be reduced to numbers. Ron sat on the other side and built nothing out of nothing and kept watch. And when Harry woke in the evening with a little of the color come back, the first thing he did was ask who they had lost, and the second thing he did was go and find each of the families and tell them the truth, that their dead had gone through clean to the rest, that there had been no pain at the end, that they were not lost and not waiting and not gone into the dark, and the families wept, and were, in a way the living are rarely allowed to be, comforted. Because the one person in the world who could actually know had crouched down to their height and told them. Then he went up to the round office where Dumbledore was waiting to do the last accounting. 6, Harry said. He stood at the window looking north into the dark toward wherever the Death-Fearer had fled. The diary years ago, the ring, the locket, the cup, the diadem, the snake, 6 pieces sent through the door. There's one left that's his and outside him. He raised his hand, the old gesture, 2 fingers to the scar that had not hurt in over a year. This one, the splinter, the piece he doesn't know I know about. It's been quiet the whole war, cowering, listening, and it's the last anchor holding him to the world, and the account can't close while it's here. Dumbledore had gone very still. And to send it through, he said slowly, the door must open for it, here inside you. Yes, Harry. The old man's voice was careful in the way Harry had learned meant fear governed hard. A piece of a soul nailed into a living host is not a ghost in a window or a fragment in a ring. It is rooted in you. It has grown into you over 14 years. I have read what little there is to read of such things, and all of it says the same. The only certain way to destroy a Horcrux housed in a living thing is to destroy the thing that houses it. To send that splinter through your door, you may have to walk to the threshold yourself. You may have to die, Harry, truly this time, the way you so nearly did in July, and there is no certainty at all that the keeper of the door comes back from being properly through it. Harry was quiet for a long moment, looking north into the dark. I know, he said. I've known since the attic at Grimmauld. I've always known this was how it ended, that the last piece of him was the one I'd have to pay for with the most. It's almost funny. He hid a piece of himself inside the one person who could destroy all the others, thinking it was the safest place in the world, and he was exactly wrong, because it means that when I come for him, I'll already have walked through my own door to clean out his splinter, and I'll come to him having died twice, and there's nothing he can show me that I won't have already met on the other side. He turned from the window. But not yet, not here. The splinter goes through when I face him at the end at the threshold, because I'm not going to spend that death and then have to fight my way across Britain to find him afterward. I'll do it once in the right place with the account ready to close the moment I come back, if I come back. And if you do not come back, then the door gets a new keeper the way it got me, and the world is rid of him either way, and you'll have Hermione's notebook to prove it costs something. Harry almost smiled, the nearest he had come in a year. But I think I come back, headmaster. I think that's the one advantage of belonging to death instead of fearing it. He runs from the door because he's certain it's the end of him. I can walk through it because I'm fairly sure by now that it isn't the end of me. We'll find out. That's rather the point of a threshold. You don't know what's on the other side until you've the courage to be the one who finds out. He found Voldemort that night with the sight the way he found everything. The Death-Fearer had fled north and gone to ground in the last place left to him, an old orphanage on a cliff, the cold institutional place where the orphan Tom Riddle had first decided that death was the enemy and that he would beat it whatever it cost, fled all the way back to the beginning of himself, to the room where the fear had started, because a cornered thing runs home even when home is the wound. He was there now alone, his army gone and his court fled and his snake dead and his soul down to 2 pieces. One of them ragged in his breast and one of them unknown to him behind the eyes of the one who was coming, and he was waiting because there was nowhere left to run, and some part of him, the oldest part, the part that had been an orphan in a cot in a place that did not love him, had perhaps always known it would end where it began. There, Harry said softly, to the dark, to the north, to the cliff and the cold house and the frightened thing inside it. I see you, I'm coming now, not to win, there's nothing to win, just to close the account the way it should have closed in a nursery 14 years ago, the way it closes for everyone in the end. He took up his wand and the broken hallow in his pocket, and the cold and the grief and the warm unfrozen thing under all of it that was the proof he had stayed himself. Wait for me. You spent your whole life running, it's almost over. And the strangest part, the part you'll never believe until you're through it, is that the door was never the enemy. I'll show you. It's the last thing I'll ever do for you, and the only kind thing anyone's done for you since before you decided to stop letting them. I'll open it gently, even for you, even after everything, because that's the difference, and it goes all the way down to the end. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. He who reigns the orphanage stood on a cliff above a gray sea, and Harry came to it alone, on foot the last mile, because some doors you walk to. He had refused the order. They had wanted to come, all of them, what was left of them, and he had told them no, the way he had told the ministry no on a July lawn a lifetime ago, and they had not argued, because they had watched him lay down 3,000 dead on the walls of Hogwarts, and they understood, now, that there were rooms only the keeper of the door could enter. Dumbledore alone had walked him to the apparition point, and the old man had said nothing wise in the end, had only put his hand on Harry's cold shoulder and held it there a moment and then let go, which was the wisest thing he could have done. And Harry had gone north and west to the cliff and the gray sea and the cold tall house where Tom Riddle had first decided to be afraid. It was condemned now, the orphanage, abandoned for decades, its windows blind, its gate hanging. And the dead of it came to the broken windows as Harry walked up the weed-choked drive, the small dead of a century of institutional childhoods, the ones who had died of the cold and the influenza and the not being loved, and they pressed to the glass in the empty frames and looked down at him with the patience of the long unhoused. And Harry felt them and marked them and promised them silently that he would come back for every one when this was done, because no child should wait in the dark of a place like this any longer than it already had. The door of the house opened before he reached it. Lord Voldemort stood in the ruined hall, and he had stopped being beautiful. The thing that had climbed out of the cauldron had worn a kind of terrible polish, a smoothness, the confidence of a creature that believed itself beyond reach, and the polish was gone now, scoured off by a winter of feeling his anchors die one by one, and what stood in the hall was barer and older and closer to the truth of him. A thin white thing with red eyes and a wand, alone in the house where he had begun, with one piece of his soul left in his breast, and no army and no court and no snake and no plan, only the oldest reflex he had, the reflex that had made him, the refusal to go through the door. "You came alone," Voldemort said. His voice had lost the hiss of certainty. "I thought you might, the arrogance of it. You think there is nothing here that can touch you." "I came alone because I didn't want anyone else in the room when this ends," Harry said. "Not because I'm safe, because they're not. You can't hurt me, Tom. You worked that out behind my own eyes in March, but you can hurt them, and I've buried enough of them this year." He stepped into the ruined hall, and the cold came in with him, and the small dead at the windows turned from the glass to watch their keeper enter the house of their long waiting. "So it's just us, the way it should have been in the nursery." "The way it's going to be? Do not," Voldemort said. "Speak to me of the nursery." "Why not? It's where you made your mistake." Harry walked slowly down the hall, and Voldemort's wand came up, and Harry did not raise his. "Not the killing. The killing was just murder. You done a lot of it. You'd do a lot more. The mistake was after. The mistake was that when the curse turned on you and tore you, a piece of you broke off and went into the only thing in that room still alive. And you spent 14 years thinking that peace was your masterstroke, the safest Horcrux, hidden behind the eyes of the one child who ever survived you." He stopped 10 feet away, close enough that the cold stood Voldemort's breath out in the dead air of the hall. "It's still there, Tom, the peace, behind my eyes. It's been listening to you lose for a year. And you never knew, because knowing would have meant looking at the door, and you could never look at the door." The red eyes changed. Harry watched the understanding arrive, watched the last certainty go out of the death-fearer, the realization that the cleverest hiding place he had ever made was inside the one creature in all the world that could open it, that he had, with his own hand, 14 years ago, placed a piece of his soul into death's own steward. "Lying," Voldemort said, and his voice told the truth that his words denied. "You know I'm not. The dead can't lie, and neither can the door. There's a piece of you in my head, and to close the account I have to send it through, and to send it through I have to go to the threshold myself, and that, Tom, that is the part you will never understand as long as whatever's left of you exists." Harry's voice was very quiet and very cold, and underneath it, still the warm, unfrozen thing. "I'm going to do it. Now. In front of you, I'm going to walk through my own door to clean your splinter out of me, and I'm going to come back, because I belong to the thing you fear and it doesn't frighten me, and then there will be exactly one piece of you left in all the world, the ragged little mane of you standing in this hall, and I'm going to open the door for that one too. Gently, even for you, and the account that should have closed in a nursery 14 years ago will close at last." "You cannot," Voldemort whispered. "No one walks through and comes back. No one. I have spent my life proving it cannot be done, that the only answer is never to go." "That was always your whole error," Harry said. "You thought the only way to survive the door was to never go through it, and I'm about to show you the other way, the one you were too afraid to even look for. Watch closely. It's the last lesson anyone will ever try to teach you, and I'm the only one who could, and I'm doing it as a kindness, though you won't believe that until you're through." And Harry Potter, master of death, sovereign of the living and the dead, lowered his wand and closed his eyes and reached into the cold place behind his ribs and opened the door inside himself, the threshold he had carried since July, and he let it open all the way for the splinter, for the last externalized piece of Tom Riddle. And the only way to reach a thing rooted that deep in a living host was to step through the door himself and take it with him. And so Harry Potter walked willingly through his own threshold for the second time in his life, and the ruined hall of the orphanage went cold and silent, and his body folded gently to the dusty floor, and Voldemort stood over it, alone, screaming, certain at last that he had won, that his enemy had finally done the one thing that could not be undone, and entirely unable to understand why the screaming felt so much like the end of everything. He stood in the gray country, and this time it knew him. There was no disorientation now, no slow understanding, none of the supplicant's confusion of a frightened child dragged through an underpass 2 years before. He stood on the featureless plain that was the waiting room of everything that had ever stopped, and the plain arranged itself toward him, the light bending, the murmur of the last words of the ended rising and then hushing, the way a great hall hushes when the one it was built for finally walks in. He had come to the gray country a second time, not as a soul newly through the door, but as the keeper of it, the sovereign of the place, and the place received its sovereign. The splinter was there. It lay near his feet, the last externalized piece of Tom Riddle, and it had a shape here, the way things took shape in the gray country, and the shape was the truth of it. A small, raw, maimed thing, hairless and flinching, the size of a hurt child, curled in on its own wrongness, whimpering, the part of a soul that had been torn off in a nursery 14 years before and shoved into a living host and made to listen behind borrowed eyes to its own slow defeat. It was not frightening. Harry had thought in the long year of carrying it that it might be frightening to finally see it. It was only sad, the way the most monstrous things are sad when you finally see them stripped of the power they borrowed, a piece of a person that had never been allowed to be a person festering in the dark of someone else's skull. You can't come back with me, Harry told it, and his voice in the gray country was quiet and had no cruelty in it. You know that. You've known it since the underpass, since you felt what I'd become with you trapped inside it. You spent a year cowering because you understood before he did. There's no host left for you, there's just the door. And I'm sorry in a way I can't explain, and you wouldn't believe that no one ever gave you the chance to be a whole thing instead of a torn-off piece of a frightened man. But you're not staying in me and you're not going back, and the only place left for you is the rest you should have had 14 years ago. The splinter whimpered and did not fight because it had no fight left, and Harry, the keeper of the door, opened the threshold the width of one maimed fragment and laid it to rest, gently the way he laid everything to rest. And the small raw thing that had been the last hidden piece of Lord Voldemort went through into the grey and was gone, undone, unmade, sent at last where the torn pieces of souls are meant to go, and the account. But for the ragged mane of him standing in a ruined hall in the living world was closed. Well met, master. Again, the horizon bent toward him, the regarding edge of the grey country, the thing he had spoken to in an underpass and at a vale beneath London, and it was different now, the way it spoke to him, and the difference was the thing it had promised on the first night, that they would one day speak as equals. They were not equals yet, he could feel that. His reign had only begun, and death was older than reigns, older than the first death, older than the first life that made death possible. But the distance between them had narrowed, the supplicant grown into the sovereign, and death regarded him now the way a very old king regards the heir who has finally proven worthy of the crown, which is to say with something that in a thing that vast and that patient was very nearly warmth. It's done, Harry said, the splinters through. There's one piece of him left, and it's in the hall, and it's mine to close when I go back. When said death, and the word had a weight to it, not if. You have noticed then that you may choose, I noticed. You have died twice now, said death, and both times by your own choosing, once to accept the crown and once to clean his poison out of your own head, and both times the door has opened for you and not closed, because you are mine and I do not close my own. The grey country brightened very slightly. You may stay. That is the thing no other soul is offered, and I offer it to you honestly, because I do not lie, and because you have earned an honest offer. You have carried the crown 2 years, and it has cost you everything I warned you it would, and some things I did not. You let your godfather through with your own hands. You knelt emptied on a wall and refused the easy thing while those you loved died behind you. No one would blame you for laying it down. You may stay and rest, and I will give the crown to another, and your parents are here, and you may go to them now and be a son again instead of a sovereign, and it would not be a failure, it would only be rest. You have never once in your life had rest. I am offering it, and they were there. Harry turned, and at the edge of the grey country, where the crowd of the dead pressed at the boundary of seeing, two of them stood a little apart from the rest. And the regarding horizon let them come forward, and James Potter looked exactly as he had in the photographs in the mirror, young and untidy and alight, and Lily Potter had Harry's eyes, or Harry had hers, and they came toward him across the plain that bends for no one and bent now for them. Because the keeper of the door had wanted to see them, and the door does not refuse its keeper, and Harry stood in the grey country with 2 years of cold cracking open in his chest and let them come. You've grown so much, his mother said. Her voice was the thing he had reached for at the bottom of every patroness and never quite found, and here it was whole. We've watched. We're allowed to watch. Did you know that the dead can watch the ones they walk to the door for? We've seen all of it. The underpass, the lake. The wall, her eyes, his eyes were wet and proud and terrible with love. We've seen what it cost you. We've seen you not become him over and over on your knees when becoming him would have stopped the hurting. Harry, my Harry, we are so, and she could not finish it and did not need to, because the dead do not have to finish their sentences with the one who keeps their door. You let Sirius through clean, his father said. His voice was rough. He's here. He's at rest properly the way you sent him, and he told us, he said the lad did it himself, can you believe it? He had the door open and his godfather right there, and he let me go because it was mine, and James, your son, is the bravest and coldest and warmest thing I have ever met on either side of the veil, and I have never been prouder of anyone in my life or my death. James Potter's wet eyes found his son. He was right, we're proud, we're so proud it doesn't have a shape even here. Harry stood between his parents in the country of the dead, and felt the warm, unfrozen thing under all the cold rise up and break finally, the grief he had held for 14 years and the grief of the last 2 and the simple, unbearable wanting of a boy for his mother and father. And he let it break here where it was safe, where no living thing could see the keeper of the door weep, and his mother held him and his father held them both, and for one moment in the grey country. Harry Potter was not a sovereign and not a steward and not the master of anything. He was a son, he had his rest. It lasted no time at all, and it lasted forever, the way time worked there, and it was enough, and it was the thing death had offered him and the thing he could not keep. I have to go back, Harry said, into his mother's shoulder. Don't I? Only you can answer that, Lily said, but you already have. We felt it the moment death offered. You never even considered staying. There's a piece of him left, and the war's dead aren't all at rest yet. And there are children in the windows of that house who have been waiting 100 years, and a girl on a corner in London, and his voice cracked again. There's so much door left to keep. If I stay, someone else has to do it, and they'll start the way I started, frightened, learning the cost the hard way, and people will wait in the dark while they learn. I can't. I know where everything is. I've already paid for most of it. It would be a kind of cowardice to put down a crown I've already bled into and hand the bill to a stranger. "We know," his father said. "We always knew you'd say that. It's why we're proud and it's why it breaks our hearts, which we still have here, it turns out." He stepped back and held his son at arm's length and looked at him the way fathers look. "Go back, finish it. Be gentle with him at the end, the way you've been gentle with everyone, because that gentleness is the whole of how you're different, and we'd hate for you to lose it on the last one. And then live, Harry, as long as you can. Keep the door and keep yourself, and we'll be right here at the end of it whenever it comes, and we are not going anywhere, because we found the one thing the living never believe and the dead always know." "What's that?" Harry whispered. "That it's good here," his mother said. "That the door was never the enemy. You knew it already. You've been telling frightened people for 2 years. Now you know it's true from the inside, and you can go back and tell them like someone who's seen it." She kissed his forehead over the scar that no longer had a splinter behind it. "Go and reign, my love, and be human while you do. They're not opposites. You've proven that. Go and prove it to the rest of them for as long as you're given." "You have chosen," said Death, and the gray country began to draw back, the crowd to settle, the parents to ease away with the calm of the truly at rest, not lost, not gone, only waiting, the way they had told him at the end of everything. "Return then, master, and close the last of Him and reign. And carry this back with you, which no living thing has ever carried out of this place before. The certain knowledge, not the hope, the knowledge that what waits beyond the door is good, and that you need fear it for no one, least of all yourself." The horizon poured itself back into the small living shape of him, the way it had in an underpass, the sovereign returning to his living throne. Geo, he is waiting. And so, at the end, as always, the gray country ended, the way it always did, not in darkness but in the simple cessation of more. He opened his eyes on the dusty floor of the ruined hall, and Voldemort was still screaming. It had been seconds in the living world. Harry had been gone the length of a held breath, a year of gray country compressed into the moment of a body folding to the floor, and he came back into himself the way the sea comes back into a tide pool all at once and from everywhere, and he sat up, and then he stood, and Lord Voldemort's scream of triumph broke off in the middle, because the keeper of the door had just done the thing that could not be done, had walked through and come back, and was rising off the dusty floor of the orphanage with the last piece of his enemy's poison gone from behind his eyes and the certain knowledge of the gray country alight in him like a lamp. "It's gone," Harry said. "The splinter, the piece of you that lived in my head for 14 years. I took it through and I laid it to rest, and it didn't even fight Tom. At the end it was just a hurt thing that no one ever let be whole, and I was sorry for it, which I think is the part you'll find hardest to believe." He stood in the cold hall, and the cold was his now, entirely. The dominion settled into him past any further cost, because there was no splinter left to wall any of it off. "There's one piece of you left in all the world. It's standing in this room, and I came back from the dead to close it." Voldemort did the only thing left to him, he fought. He was, whatever else he had become, one of the most powerful wizards who had ever lived, and cornered and stripped, and down to the last ragged piece of himself, he was still that, and he threw everything in the long, terrible arsenal of his 60 years at the figure walking toward him across the ruined hall. The killing curse, again and again, the green light that had made him and unmade so many, and it crossed the cold air and struck Harry and guttered out against him like a match in a gale, because it was Death's own curse, and it had come home, finally and forever, to Death's own steward. Fiendfire, the cursed flame that consumes even other curses, and Harry walked through it, and it did not consume the keeper of the door. It banked and died around him like a fire starved of air, because fire is a kind of ending, and endings answered to Harry now. Every dark and terrible art the Death-fearer had spent a lifetime mastering, and each one broke against the simple fact of what stood in the hall, until Voldemort stood with his wand shaking in his white hand and nothing left to throw, an old frightened orphan in a condemned house, having spent the entire arsenal of the most feared wizard in the world on a thing that could not be touched by any of it. "Why won't you die?" Voldemort whispered. It was not rage. It was the oldest question he had, the one that had made him, asked now in a voice gone back to the cot in the place that did not love him. "I have given everything. I tore my soul. I killed and killed. I built myself past the reach of it. Why does it answer to you who never wanted it, who never sought it, who would have been an ordinary boy if I had only chosen some other child that night? Because I never ran from it," Harry said. He had stopped an arm's length away, close enough that the cold of the threshold stood in the dead air between them. "That's the whole of it, Tom. That's the answer to the only question you ever really asked. It was never going to answer to the one who fled it. It was only ever going to answer to the one who could look at it without flinching and not be made cruel by the looking. You spent 60 years proving you were the cleverest wizard alive, and you never once understood the simplest thing a child understands before the world frightens it out of them, that the door isn't the enemy, that it's the mercy at the end of the pain, that a world without it would be the truest hell that could ever be built, and that you and your terror spent your whole life trying to build exactly that hell, a world where nothing could ever rest." He raised his hand, not his wand, his hand, the way he had for the cat and the black on the windowsill and 3,000 dead on a wall. "I'm going to open it for you now, gently, the same as everyone. You've earned a great deal of things, Tom Riddle, and almost none of them are good, but no one, not even you, deserves to be the one soul in all of creation that never gets to rest. So I'm going to give you the one thing you spent your whole life refusing, and I'm going to make it kind, because that's who I am, and being kind to you at the end is the last proof that I never became you." "No," Voldemort said. the wand fell from his hand. He backed against the rotted wall of the hall where he had grown up, and the red eyes were wide, and the thing in them at the very last was not hatred and was not defiance. It was the small naked dread of the orphan, meeting at last, after 60 years of flight, the thing he had run from down every dark road he had ever walked. "No, please, I am not ready. No one is ever ready," Harry said gently. "That's why someone has to keep the door, so that being ready was never the price of admission. You don't have to be ready, you only have to go. And the strangest thing, the thing you never let anyone tell you, is that it's good on the other side. I came back to tell you. It's good, Tom, even for you I think it might be. Go and find out. It's the last lesson, and I'm the only one who could ever have taught it to you, and I'm teaching it as a kindness, whatever you believe." And Harry Potter, master of death, sovereign of the living and the dead, opened the threshold the width of one ragged, frightened soul, and Lord Voldemort, the death-fearer who had torn himself 7 ways and murdered without number and built his whole long, unnatural existence on the refusal of this single moment, met the door at last. There was no green flash. There was no scream. There was only the opening, gentle as Harry had promised, and the last piece of Tom Riddle's soul, the bare ragged mane of him, going through into the grey country, undone, unmade, sent where it should have gone in a nursery 14 years before, and the body that had climbed out of a cauldron folded down against the wall of the orphanage and was still. And the account, after 14 years and a war and 3,000 mercies and one godfather and a boy's whole stolen childhood, was closed. The hall was very quiet. Harry stood over the still thing that had been Lord Voldemort, and he did not feel triumph, and he did not feel hatred, and he had not for a long time. He felt the old tiredness, and under it the warm, unfrozen thing his parents had named, and he felt, looking down at the bare dead orphan who had made himself a monster rather than face this room, something that surprised even the part of him that had stopped being surprised by anything. He felt grief. Not for the monster, for the child in the cot, in the place that did not love him, who might have been anyone, who chose the one road that led here, and never once let a single person show him there was any other. Harry crouched down beside the body, the way he crouched to children and to the newly dead, and he closed the red eyes with 2 cold fingers, and he stayed there a moment in the house where the whole long catastrophe had begun, with the last of his enemy gone to a rest he had spent a lifetime insisting did not exist. "Go gently," Harry said, to the empty hall, to the grey country, to the orphan who had become a Dark Lord and was now only finally dead. "It's good there, you'll see. I'm sorry no one ever told you sooner. I'm sorry it had to be me at the end in this room. I'm sorry for the whole of it, Tom. Rest now, the account's closed. You can stop running. There was never anywhere to run, and there was never any need, and that's the saddest thing I know, and now it's over." He kept his promise to the children before he left the house. The small dead were still at the windows when he came out of the hall, the influenza dead and the cold dead and the not-loved dead of a century of institutional childhoods, and they pressed to the blind glass in the empty frames and looked down at the one who had finally come. And Harry went through the condemned orphanage room by room, up the rotted stairs and along the dripping corridors, and he opened the door for each of them, gently, one at a time. The dormitory ghosts and the infirmary ghosts and the one small shade that had been waiting in a cupboard under the stairs since before the First War, and he gave them the rest the house had never given them in life. Until the cold tall building on the cliff stood empty at last, truly empty. 100 years of waiting ended in an afternoon, and the grey sea breathed against the foot of the cliff, and the place where the whole catastrophe had begun was, finally, only a house. Then he went home and began the longer work. It took the rest of that year, and it was the work that defined what kind of sovereign he would be. He could have ruled. The world was offered to him a second time, more openly than the first. With Voldemort gone and the Master of Death undeniable, there was not a government in the magical world that would have refused him a throne, and a great many that quietly hoped he would take one, because a power that had laid down 3,000 dead in mercy seemed a safer thing to be ruled by than the frightened committees that had failed so badly. He refused it again and more firmly, and he made the refusing the first act of his reign so that no one would mistake what the reign was. He did not want their chairs. He had told a deputation so in a side room a year before, and he told the whole world so now, that he kept the threshold and the threshold alone, and that the living world was theirs to govern and theirs to ruin and theirs to mend, and that the day a keeper of the door reached for the crown of the living was the day he became the very thing the door existed to prevent. What he did instead was lay the war to rest. He went to every battlefield of both wars, the old one and the new, and he opened the door for the dead who had been left unhoused by them. The ones in unmarked graves and the ones whose graves had been forgotten and the ones who had lingered, the way the dead lingered, at the place of their ending because no one had ever shown them the way out. He went to the families, the ones whose dead were already at rest, and told them so, crouching to their height, telling them the truth no one else in all the world could tell, that their dead were not lost and not waiting and not gone into the dark. And the comfort of it spread across the wizarding world slowly and then completely, the single certain piece of knowledge no living person had ever carried before. That it was good on the other side, that the door was a mercy, that grief was real and permanent and survivable because the rest on the far side of it was real and permanent and good. He had brought it back out of the grey country, the knowledge, the way death had told him no living thing ever had, and he spent the rest of his long life giving it away. He put the Hallows down. That surprised the people who had read the old legends and expected the Master of Death to wield the three together in some final blaze. He had them by then. The cloak had been his father's, and the broken stone had come from a ruined ring, and the wand, the old terrible wand, had answered to him the moment he became what he was, the way everything that belonged to death answered to its steward. He had all three, the wand and the stone and the cloak, the things the seekers had torn the ages apart to gather, and he understood, holding them, the joke that had been buried in the legend all along. That they had never made anyone the master of death, that they were only death's calling cards, three objects shaped to look like power so that the frightened would chase them down dead-end roads while the real mastery waited free for the one who could meet the door without flinching. He kept the cloak because it had been his father's and because invisibility is a small human comfort. He left the broken stone where it lay because he had no need to call the dead and every reason not to. And the wand he set aside unused, its long bloody history ended in the hand of someone who did not need it and would not use it, so that when he died it would die with him, its power broken at last, not by a duel but by a keeper who simply declined to want it. He grew up. That was the strangest part, the part none of the legends had prepared anyone for, that the master of death went back to school and finished his examinations and grew year by year into a grave and quiet man who was also underneath, still the one who had carried Cedric home across a killing field because it would have been easier to leave him. The cold never left him. The pane of glass between him and the warm world was permanent, exactly as he had been warned in an underpass, and he ate at tables and felt the chill come in with him, and the people who loved him learned, the way Sirius had learned, not to flinch, and that not flinching was the whole of how he stayed human. The daily refusal of the people who loved him to let the cold be the last word about him. Ron grew old, the way Harry had seen on the stairs of the burrow, heavy and contented, with grandchildren on his knee and stories they refused to believe. And he was Harry's friend every one of those long years and never once flinched, and was buried at last full of years with Harry standing at the graveside, the one mourner in all the world who knew for certain that his oldest friend had gone through clean to the good rest, and could say so and did and was believed because by then everyone believed him. Hermione kept her notebook her whole life, the record of the cost, and added to it, and when she was very old she gave it to the people who write the histories, so that no one would ever tell the story as though it had been easy, as though Harry had always been the cold grave sovereign and it had never hurt, and the notebook is the reason this story can be told at all with the cost left in. He went on the last evening of that first year to Godric's Hollow, to the churchyard, to the two graves with his own name on them, and he stood there a long time in the failing light. He did not call them, he never called them, the whole of his long life. He had refused the easy thing at the ring, and he refused it always, and that refusal was the discipline that kept him from becoming the thing he had unmade. But he did not need to call them. He had seen them in the gray country, and they had held him, and they had told him to go and reign and be human, and they were not lost and not waiting and not gone into the dark. And he stood at their graves in the cold churchyard with the knowledge of it warm and unbearable in his chest. And he said quietly, the way you speak to the dead when you are the one who keeps their door, it's done. He's at rest, even him. I let him through gentle, the way you said. And I'm going to live now as long as I'm given and keep the door and stay myself. And when it's my time, my real time, I'll come to you the honest way, the way everyone does, through the door with my arms open, the way Mum walked to it for me. Not before, I promise. Not one day before it's mine. The wind came off the hills and moved the long grass of the churchyard, and somewhere behind him in the village the lights were coming on in the windows, the ordinary warm lights of the living, and the dead of the churchyard stood at rest all around him and asked nothing, because their keeper was among them and the door was kept and there was nothing left to want. Harry Potter, master of death, sovereign of the living and the dead, turned up the collar of his father's cloak against a cold that was inside him and not in the wind, and walked back down toward the warm lights, toward the living world that feared him and trusted him and could not challenge him and could, a few of them, the ones who refused to flinch, still love him, and he went to them grave and cold and human beneath the mantle, to reign the only way he ever would, by keeping the door. And laying the weary to rest, and telling frightened people the truth about their grands, for as long as the long years gave him, until the evening far off and unhurried and unafraid, when the door would open one last time for the one who kept it, and he would walk through it with his arms open and find on the other side exactly what he had spent his whole reign promising the living they would find, which was rest in his mother's eyes and that it was good. Chapter 7 End.